Chapter 106, set up their own faction, but, at this time, the other 9 senior disciples noticed the problem that the black-robed disciple was facing. Their eyesight was far developed compared to these new disciples, as it was something that one would gain with time and experience. At this time, these senior disciples immediately rushed forward in order to assist the black-robed youth, when all of a sudden, a terrifying Bladiki instantly descended from the sky and chopped down in front of them. This terrifying Bladiki instantly split out a huge rift in the ground, extending several meters. Could it be that you senior disciples can only bully others based on your numerical advantage? Yi Shiwen said in a cold voice while pointing his long blade towards them. Among those 9 disciples, there were many at the peak of Xiantian 3rd stage and weren't one bit weaker than the black-robed youth, but at this time, all of them were covered in cold sweat. If they had been a little faster a moment ago, that blade attack would have really beheaded all of them, and just thinking about it, they had been completely stunned. Even they had to admit, if they had not been attentive, they would definitely have been split in half. Just from the fierceness and might present in that blade attack, they had realized that this blade-wielding boy would absolutely not show them any mercy the next time. Although they had heard that a lot of talented disciples had joined the main sect this year, but they didn't expect to see so many formidable Xiantian masters. During the former years, if a new disciple who had entered into the Xiantian realm, then he was considered an extremely outstanding disciple. However, this year, there were just way too many new disciples who had already entered into the Xiantian realm. In the past, they could easily bully those new disciples and would force them to join their faction, but among this year's new disciples, there were some very thorny existences like Yen Chiliang and this boy wielding a long blade. They never thought that these new disciples would prove to be so hard to deal with. When they had been sent by the Foodie faction to completely suppress these new disciples, they never expected such an outcome. However, right now, they were entirely sure that if they dared to take even a step further, that blade-wielding boy wouldn't hesitate to behead them right there right then, and if they tried to tell about this matter to the high-level members of their faction, then they would definitely die in vain. The sudden appearance of Yi Shiwen had completely cornered them. They had come to bully the weak, and their plan had failed, and if they go to tell the elders about this incident, then they would only end up as a laughingstock. The new disciples were looking at Yi Shiwen with a look of worship in their eyes. Of course, they admired Yen Chiliang for fighting against a senior disciple on equal terms, but they simply worshipped Yi Shiwen, as he had used just one blade attack, and 9 senior disciples had completely paused and were scared to take a single step forward or backward. They had repressed the feelings of hatred after being oppressed by these top disciples for all these days, but these feelings had finally been vented out thanks to Yi Shiwen. With the unexpected appearance of Yi Shiwen, after a while, the black-robed youth was unable to cope up with the suppressive attacks of Yen Chiliang and continued to dodge one attack after the other, but after a while, Yen Chiliang found an opening and managed to hit a punch on his body. The black-robed youth was sent flying after receiving that punch from Yen Chiliang and heavily fell on the ground, then fell unconscious. "Take him and get lost. Next time, I won't show any mercy," Yen Chiliang gasped and said. The senior disciples did not stay. It would be ridiculous if they stayed there, especially when Yi Shiwen was eyeing them like a killing god. They would never dare to stay there for a long time. "Brother Yi, this time we were saved thanks to your help." Yen Chiliang looked at those departing senior disciples and couldn't help but said with a smile on his face, "It was nothing." Yi Shiwen said, "Brother Yen, I think that we should form a faction." Yi Shiwen still didn't want to be part of a faction, but he preferred to be a part of one than being chased down by others. After all, it was somewhat troublesome, and he wouldn't be able to run away for too long. And even if he was careful and tried to avoid joining any faction, but these people knew where he lived, so rather than joining a faction, it was better for him to form one. "Brother Yi, you mean?" Yen Chiliang said in a delighted tone, although originally, their faction was just in the prototype stage and he could be considered a strong leader who could run a faction, but if Yi Shiwen was willing to join them, then things would be entirely different, because Yi Ziwen's addition to their faction had suddenly increased their strength by many times and had greatly improved the appeal as well. "I am just enrolling, I won't manage the matters inside the faction." Yi Shiwen said that as he didn't want to divert his concentration from practicing to anything else, and even if he had made this decision, but he still wanted to enjoy his unrestrained complete freedom. "No problem." Yan Qiliang excitedly said. With the addition of Yi Shiwen to the faction, the appeal would immediately increase, and the most important thing was that Yi Shiwen did not want to get involved in the management, so the power would be in his hands, so this was a double benefit for him. Everybody, please pay attention to what I am going to say. I once again announce that I, together with Brother Yi, am planning to jointly form a faction and any of the new disciples can join us. Yan Qiliang said in a loud voice. Earlier, the faction was just in name, but after this announcement and with the addition of Yi Shiwen to the faction, it was finally going to officially form. Some of the new disciples hesitated, because before they were sticking close to Yan Qiliang as they knew that survival was very difficult in the main sect and only by sticking together, one could stay away from unforeseen danger. As Yan Qiliang was a top disciple who had leader-like characteristics, so they had decided to stick with him until things would settle down, then they would walk away anytime, but after they would join the faction, they would be unable to walk away as it would be equivalent to betraying the faction and it was absolutely not allowed. In any faction, members were not allowed to leave, unless and until they were strong enough to do so. I will join. A new disciple raised his hand and said, I have had enough of these senior disciples bullying us. I don't want to be bullied anymore and getting together is the only way out. Right, I will also join. I will join as well. If those senior disciples can create factions, then we would form our own. You are right, if they can do it then so can we. After all, we were once the outstanding disciples of our subschools and there's nothing we can't achieve. A disciple said. The other new disciples were also stimulated by this sudden series of approvals and a large number of new disciples came forward to form the faction. In the past, one more faction had been formed by the new disciples, which later became one of the super factions, and its might stretched across the 10 prominent peaks. The leader of this faction was a true disciple and was also one of the strongest individuals in the Yuan school. Good, since everybody is willing to join the faction, then our faction has now been officially established, but we must give it a name. Does anyone know a good name for the faction? Yan Qiliang asked. Many disciples rushed to say several names, but these names couldn't satisfy the crowd. Finally, a disciple suggested the name Qianyu faction, and it got the consent of most of the disciples and hence was made the official name of the faction. Many of the disciples were somewhat excited, because from now on, they would be known as the members of the Qianyu faction, and no one could guess how big their faction would grow in the future. Chapter 107. Towards the deepest parts of sect. After the creation of Qianyu faction, Yi Shiwen did not participate in the faction matters and left all management works to Yan Qiliang, who was obviously handling these matters with ease, as managing was a familiar task for him, as he had gained experience as the strongest disciple of the Divine Volcano Subschool. Yi Shiwen returned to his own small courtyard, and about this aspect, he and Yan Qiliang had a tacit understanding. Whether these factions would thrive or fail relied on the managing qualities of its leader, and so long as the leader was formidable and had outstanding leading qualities, then even with 2 or 3 members, the faction could become very formidable, but if the leader was not strong enough, then the faction was bound to disband. At this time, Yan Qiliang and Yi Shiwen were the only formidable members of Qianyu faction, but they were strong enough to hoist the flag of their faction in front of everyone. Yi Shiwen realized that perhaps things won't stay so calm in the future, but since he had already decided to join a faction, then he would need to become a lot stronger to back it up. Yi Shiwen had no alternatives, and he didn't have any escape routes as well, as he was already aware of the arrogant attitude of those other factions who would never allow the growth of a faction created by new disciples, and would use any good opportunity to crush them along with their faction. So whether it was to protect oneself or to safeguard the future, he must strive now and prepare himself. Moreover, in his heart, a feeling of comparison had also come into being that if some people had already done it before, then there was no reason why he won't achieve it. At present, Yi Ziwen's strength had increased considerably compared to his strength 1 month ago when he had just entered into the Xiantian second stage. As he had transformed 60% Xiantian Jinqi, his fighting strength was comparable to or even more than that of the peak Xiantian third stage master. And now, it was time for him to have a breakthrough. After having a breakthrough and reaching the Xiantian third stage, he would be able to easily beat a master of Xiantian fourth stage. After making up his mind, Yi Shiwen left his small courtyard and immediately went into the direction of Gongda Palace Hall. Tongtian Peak's Gongda Palace Hall looked more luxurious and elaborate and was also the role model for the Gongda Palace halls of other subschools. Therefore, Yi Shiwen did not actually find it strange after entering the Gongda Palace Hall. After entering the hall, first, he turned in 1,000 spirit stones and converted them into 1,000 points. Now his total stock of spirit stones had decreased to a total of 6,000 spirit stones, but he was not sad, because he knew that there were a lot of things that spirit stones couldn't buy, and it was necessary to exchange them for school points, but this fact could be considered as a part of the hidden benefits offered at the main sect. Yi Shiwen immediately redeemed the 1,000 points for a red-crowned crane that would become his flying mount for traveling. This red-crowned crane was one of the demon birds used by people as mounts and were raised in the Yiyuan school's main sect. Because of their gentle nature, good control, and relationship with the rider, they had become the preferred means of transport for many disciples, and thanks to the blood of demon beasts running through their veins, these cranes could fly for thousands of miles without taking rest. However, these demon birds were naturally not cheap, and besides Yi Shiwen, only filthy rich inner disciples could afford a red-crowned crane, and this number was not more than 200 to 300 people out of several thousand inner disciples. Yi Shiwen had chosen a tall crane standing up to more than 2 meters tall, and it was an extremely good means for flying through the air. After Yi Shiwen activated the control method for the red-crowned crane and used the password, it blinked once, and jumped high in the sky, and after coming to a stop, it opened its huge wings, and flew at a lightning speed towards the depths of the Yiyuan school. Using the control method, he could directly use his thoughts to communicate with the crane, and that's how he was manipulating the speed and direction of the flight. Yiyuan school was stacked with many mountain ranges and spreading across each other, and even if he was so high from the ground, he could still hear the roars of countless demon beasts present on those mountains. And as he was flying towards the deeper parts of the Yiyuan school, these roars were growing even louder. It was said that Yiyuan school had captured and raised many demon beasts in this mountain forest spread in several square kilometers of area, compared to which, the mountain forest of Qingfeng Mountain was nothing. In the main sect, these demon beasts, devils, and other unusual creatures were housed together to be used by the disciples for practicing. The red-crowned crane's flying speed was extremely fast, and he could feel its lightning-fast speed, because only after flying for about half an hour, they had crossed the entire mountain range. This had made him very certain that buying a crane was certainly not a bad idea, and by paying 1,000 points, he had saved a lot of time that he would have wasted by walking for several days to cover the same distance. The crane descended on a flat land, and after Yi Shiwen jumped off from its back, it again flapped its wings and flew high into the sky, waiting for the next summon from him. Yi Shiwen was surprised to actually hear the continuous roars of demon beasts one after the other in the entire mountain forest, and these roars were hoarse, sharp, low, and deep, which could cause goosebumps to anyone who heard them. Occasionally, he would also see some disciples atop their demon birds flying in the sky. Yi Shiwen knew that time was running out and he must break through as soon as possible, in order to face the challenges later. Yi Shiwen didn't hesitate anymore, and with a burst of Zhen Qi under his feet, his body dashed towards the forest like a shell, and directly entered the forest. Soon, he had gently and swiftly passed innumerable big trees, and had entered the depths of the forest. Chapter 108. Practice in the forest. Yi Shiwen was standing on a tree branch. He had entered fairly deep into the mountain forest, and as he had gone deeper into the forest, the strength of the demon beasts had continued to increase as well. Although only Hotian-level demon beasts were present on the outer areas of the forest, but the weakest among them was only at the Hotian 7th or 8th stage, and compared to the average level of demon beasts present in the Qingfeng Mountain, this was a lot intense. Phew! A shrill piercing cry came out of nowhere and a cold brightness flashed behind Yi Shiwen. He almost instinctively dodged and somersaulted to another tree, and at this time he finally got a chance to look at what it was. It was a praying mantis, about 2 meters tall, covered with dark green outer shell, and its 2 giant blade-like forelegs were dancing, issuing a fabric tear-like sound in the surroundings. It had two thick and huge fangs pointing out of its mouth, which was densely covered with fine teeth and could easily snap a steel bar with a single bite. It had two huge wings flapping on its back, blowing the wind high up in the sky. Seeing that Yi Shiwen had avoided its attack, the giant praying mantis gave out a loud scream, flapped its huge wings, and its huge figure instantly rushed with a lightning speed towards him. The pair of steel blade-like forelegs brandished instantly, and like two giant scissors, they approached to cut him. Unexpectedly, this attack was very much similar to martial arts technique. Praying Mantis Fist. This praying mantis clearly possessed wisdom and high intellect, because it was easily displaying the praying mantis fist, and one could see that its attacks and gestures looked similar to the praying mantis fist technique practiced by humans. The praying mantis had opened up the world bridge that had helped in circulating the Zhen Qi through the meridians present in its body. It had already entered into the Xiantian realm, and its fighting prowess was comparable to the warriors of peak Xiantian second stage. Its blade-like forelegs released a sharp bladiki and instantly chopped out towards Yi Shiwen. "You filthy beast!" Yi Shiwen shouted, then took out his long blade and instantly chopped out a terrifying bladiki towards the incoming bladiki released from the forelegs of praying mantis. Boom! The two shares of bladiki severely clashed and caused a huge explosion. But then, the terrifying bladiki released from Yi Shiwen's long blade dispersed the praying mantis bladiki and rushed forward. The eyes of praying mantis revealed an astonished look. It was a demon beast that had got wisdom after breaking through from Hotian realm to the Xiantian realm, which was definitely not easy for a demon beast, so it could feel that Yi Shiwen would not be so easy to deal with. The praying mantis immediately realized that although this human looked small, but it was definitely not an opponent it could take lightly. It didn't hesitate and immediately flapped its wings and flew into the air to dodge the terrifying bladiki. "Want to escape?" Yi Shiwen sneered and suddenly jumped up towards the praying mantis like a shell ejected from the cannon. Yi Shiwen's form was like an arrow, and immediately appeared in front of the praying mantis in the air. His terrifying Zhen Qi completely burst out, and after adjusting his stature in the midair, he took a stance and struck his long blade towards the mantis. A terrifying Daomong split the air and instantly chopped out. Poochie! The tough dark green outer shell covering the body of praying mantis instantly shattered, and its whole body was split in half. Boom! The two halves of the huge body of praying mantis fell on the ground, and Yi Shiwen also landed on the ground with ease. He stored the entire body of the praying mantis in his space ring, as even the corpses of Xiantian-level demon beasts were considered as precious treasures. Its outer shell could be processed into armor, and its two blade-like forelimbs could be used to make high-quality long blades. Of course, he did not have the skill to make these weapons, but there were others who were quite skilled in making weapons from the bodies of demon beasts, and he could sell the corpse of praying mantis to them in exchange of some spirit stones. Although he won't get many spirit stones in exchange for praying mantis corpse, but as they say that many little drops make an ocean. Yi Shiwen did not stay and was about to leave when suddenly, he heard the sound of flapping wings coming from the sky. A flock of carrion vultures had been attracted to the smell of blood coming from the blood stains of praying mantis left on the ground. Most of these carrion vultures were at the Hotian 9th stage, nearly 2 meters tall and wingspan of over 5 meters, and were hiding the sky and covering the earth. The leader of the flock was significantly taller than the others and looked formidable, and its whole body was covered in golden yellow feather. It was none other than the golden carrion vulture king. Although, this was a small flock of carrion vultures and was definitely not the strongest ones present in the forest, but this area of the forest was their territory. When these carrion vultures couldn't find the body of praying mantis, they suddenly rushed towards Yi Shiwen. Many of the carrion vultures flocked together on him, and their sharp claws fiercely approached to tear him apart. If he was an average person, then he would have instantly been torn to shreds. "These beasts!" Yi Shiwen shouted and instantly chopped out his long blade. 9 blade shadows appeared and rushed towards the flock of carrion vultures, and several carrion vultures were instantly split in half by this terrifying large-scale blade attack. Yi Shiwen continued to attack relentlessly while his long blade kept on dancing in his hand and releasing blade shadows horizontally and vertically towards the flock. Yi Shiwen's blade attacks were so incredible that none of the carrion vultures could bear even a single attack. Even their leader, a Xiantian realm carrion vulture, was not a match of Yi Shiwen. He would effortlessly wave his blade and several carrion vultures would fall down, chopped in pieces. These carrion vultures had surrounded Yi Shiwen like huge black clouds and were crying out strange terrifying sounds which could send chills down the spines of anyone who would hear them. Yi Ziwen's figure flashed and moved gracefully while his blade waved and released a bright blade light which completely wrapped him in a sphere of light without leaving any gap. There was no way left for the carrion vultures to approach him, and those who tried to get close to him were instantly chopped down in pieces and fell on the ground. Yi Ziwen's long blade was constantly dancing in his hand, releasing a terrifying blade light everywhere. Those carrion vultures didn't get any chance to dodge and met their tragic deaths while screaming pitifully. After a while, hundreds of mighty carrion vultures had been slaughtered and turned into a pile of chopped-up corpses, leaving only the golden carrion vulture king. When he saw how Yi Shiwen had killed his own people, the golden carrion vulture king got extremely furious and flew towards Yi Shiwen with an incredibly fast speed, with its golden body resembling a golden arrow rushing towards him. Yi Ziwen's blade chopped out a dazzling blade light. Clang! The blade light fiercely crashed into the body of golden carrion vulture king, producing a metal clashing sound. However, his body was abnormally sturdy, as if it was made of iron and wasn't chopped down in pieces like the other carrion vultures. However, after taking Yi Ziwen's blade attack head-on, the golden carrion vulture felt dizzy and his body was blasted away and fiercely crashed into a tree. Yi Ziwen's eyes flashed and his stature instantly soared towards the golden carrion vulture king, and he immediately chopped down his blade. Poochie! Although the body of golden carrion vulture king was extremely tough, but this time, Yi Shiwen directly used his blade to sever the head of the golden carrion vulture king from his body. Yi Shiwen relaxed, but there were just too many corpses of these carrion vultures, so he decided to take only the demon cores. This level of practice is not enough to have a breakthrough. I must work harder. Chapter 109. Snow Ape. In an instant, 3 days had already passed, and within these 3 days, Yi Shiwen had went deeper into the mountain forest and had also encountered numerous demon beasts. He didn't know the names of many of these demon beasts, and some of them had attacked together in groups. He also encountered many demon beasts with their fighting strength comparable to that of the masters of peak Xiantian 3rd stage. During these 3 days, Yi Shiwen didn't get a tiny bit of relaxation time, and the more he wanted to have a breakthrough, the more he would force himself into tempering his body and inner state in the most extreme situations. But he was not in a hurry because he had not yet received any message from the Yanqiliang. He and Yanqiliang had already decided that if something happened, then Yanqiliang would immediately tell him using the subpoena talisman, and Yi Shiwen would immediately fly on his red crown crane and rush back at maximum speed. Therefore, Yi Shiwen was not anxious at the moment and was practicing in the forest without worrying about the safety of his comrades. But he had to deal with his own worries. During these 3 days, he hadn't dared to take rest, because if he had decided to rest and had lost attention even for an instant, then perhaps he would really lose his life the very next instant. This forest was the most dangerous environment he had experienced so far, and even the dangerous environment of Huanma territory was nothing compared to this, let alone the forest on the backside of Qingfeng Mountain. There were a lot of terrifyingly strong demon beasts present in this forest, and even the slightest carelessness could cause death. Several times, Yi Shiwen had encountered danger in this forest, although he had continued to go deeper into the forest for 3 days, but as a result of constantly encountering demon beasts as well as his careful advancement through the forest, he had not actually advanced too deep and was still in the outermost region. However, even if he was still in the outer region of the forest, it was still packed with a large number of Xiantian realm demon beasts. Wandering in this region for the last 3 days, he had not seen a single Hotian realm demon beast, and the reason for that was it was impossible for Hotian realm demon beasts to survive in this region of the forest. Yi Shiwen was sure that once he would go deeper into the forest, he would definitely encounter Xiantian 5th stage demon beasts or above, and he suspected that even the Zhendao realm demon beasts were present in the deeper parts of the forest. Zhendao realm disciples would come to practice in this forest all year round, so it could be guessed that there definitely were a lot of Zhendao realm demon beasts lurking in the deeper parts of this forest. However, this was only his speculation and he did not have the evidence to back it up. Within these 3 days, Yi Shiwen had faced many life and death situations and had still continued to practice in order to have a breakthrough, and this kind of practice had shown great benefits. Now, he had arrived at the peak of transformation of 60% Xiantian Jin Qi. He felt as if there was a big reservoir of water in his body, filled to the brink, and with every movement of his body, he would have a feeling as if the water would pour out from the reservoir. He was very familiar with this kind of feeling, as this was a sign that he was very close to having a breakthrough. Yi Shiwen was jumping from one branch to the other when suddenly, hail started to fall down from the sky without any prior indication or warning. Yi Shiwen immediately propped up his Jin Qi, as he had become very used to during these 3 days. It was said that a formidable demon beast could induce a change in the weather, not to mention there were so many formidable demon beasts lurking in this forest. Fortunately, the good thing was that this sudden weather change was on a limited scale and was definitely caused by a demon beast of limited ability, so it would be easy for him to leave this affected area and avoid confronting the demon beast behind it. The size of the hail grew bigger and bigger, and the nearby trees directly bent after getting hit by these hails, but didn't collapse down. After all, these trees had been nourished after getting subjected to divine Lingqi day and night. And although it could not be said that these trees were similar to other Lingqi-rich treasures, but they were still strong enough to bear this hailstorm. However, it didn't go as he had planned, because he couldn't escape from the scope of this hailstorm and ran right into the demon beast that was the reason behind this sudden weather change. It was actually a snow ape. It was a giant demon beast with a huge body, 3 meters tall. Its whole body was covered with snow-white hair, and there was an aggressive look on its face. Yi Shiwen immediately realized that this hailstorm was caused because this snow ape was having a breakthrough and had just broken through to the Xiantian 4th stage, and since his breath was still unstable, he had lost control over its powers and had caused this unusual change in the weather of the surrounding area. Roar! Snow ape hammered its huge fists on its chest and roared wildly, again agitating the surrounding weather by suddenly causing a blizzard, spreading the wind and snow in all directions. Each of its punches would cause air explosions, producing a rumbling down, and would also induce a snowstorm in the surroundings. It seemed as if this snow ape had practiced a fist technique, and this was actually the fist technique of the snow apes, although the movement was very simple, but it was extremely powerful and heavy. Snow ape's eyes were firmly locked onto Yi Shiwen, and there was an ominous look in its eyes. After all, he had dared to enter into its territory, but Yi Shiwen noticed that it had an eager expression on its face along with a hint of excitement mixed with it. Yi Shiwen was surprised for a moment. Although he had seen many wise Xiantian demon beasts that possessed high intellect, but he had never seen a demon beast like Snow Ape who was showing such an anthropomorphic expression on its face. Even he could make out that this Snow Ape was excited at the moment, and it was said that the stronger a demon beast was, the greater its intellect would be, not to mention, the ape-class demon beasts were considered closest to the humanity. Yi Shiwen now clearly understood that this snow ape had just now broken through to the Xiantian 4th stage and was looking to have a match with him. Yi Shiwen was still thinking how to deal with this snow ape when suddenly, its fist punched out a terrible blast of snow and ice, made up of its Jin Qi, which instantly rumbled towards Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen did not dare to take Snow Ape's attack too lightly, as after having a breakthrough it had become a demon beast of Xiantian 4th stage. He immediately pulled out his long blade and chopped out. Boom! Yi Shiwen launched his blade attack towards the snowstorm rushing towards him, and the collision instantly set off a terrifying blast which blasted away Yi Shiwen into the air, and his body was instantly frozen stiff. Yi Shiwen quickly released this stiffness by circulating the Jin Qi throughout his body, but at this time, it could be seen from its facial expression that the snow ape was getting more and more excited. It rushed forward, trotting on the ground while making huge footprints, and then pounced on Yi Shiwen. The movements of Snow Ape were extremely quick, and it looked like a white lightning when it instantly threw itself in front of Yi Shiwen. At this instant, in Yi Shiwen's eyes, it appeared as if a huge snow-covered mountain had suddenly appeared right in front of him, but he didn't get enough time to react as its furry huge fist immediately punched out with a burst of cold air. The snow ape continued to throw its ice-cold punches relentlessly one after the other at Yi Shiwen, without giving him any chance to recuperate. The terrifying coercive aura of Snow Ape was firmly locked on him, and combined with its ice-cold presence, it was very hard for him to breathe. Yi Shiwen shouted and shot out his palm. Hidden dragon rises from the abyss. Roar! Soon, a gigantic dragon instantly congealed out of his palm and leapt high into the sky. Then it descended towards the Snow Ape. Boom! The gigantic dragon malicious collided with the arm of Snow Ape that it had lifted up to block. Kara! Snow Ape's arm directly broke under the tremendous might of coiling dragon palm. Chapter 110 Breakthrough in Battle, Kara. Snow Ape's arm directly broke under the tremendous might of coiling dragon palm. A startled look flashed on the face of the Snow Ape. It never expected that a single strike from Yi Shiwen could actually fracture its arm. Yi Shiwen slightly gasped for breath, as this move had just now consumed 10% of his Xiantian Jin Qi. Although the might of this move was very large, but even so, it couldn't kill the Snow Ape and could only fracture its arm. This Snow Ape was really formidable. However, Yi Ziwen's blood had begun to boil up and seethe with excitement. At present, his current strength was enough to easily defeat the masters of peak Xiantian 3rd stage, and he could even contend with the masters of early Xiantian 4th stage. And right now, his opponent was a Snow Ape that had just broken into the Xiantian 4th stage and had yet to consolidate its strength. So this time, two opponents of rivaling strengths had met in battle, so it was bound to be exciting for both of them. The perfect opponents. Snow Ape had come to realize that Yi Ziwen's strength was ridiculously large, and it couldn't fight recklessly with him. With another Kara sound, the broken bone in its arm returned back to its original position, and suddenly, it pulled out a giant stick out of nowhere and jumped towards Yi Shiwen and smashed the stick, which released numerous shadows, and one could see that it contained the essence of the stick technique, which was stronger compared to the Snow Ape fist technique. It was obvious that this Snow Ape had practiced the stick technique to a very profound level. Yi Shiwen did not hesitate and took out his long blade and chopped out. Boom! A bright daomeng released from the blade and clashed fiercely with the stick Jinmeng, and with a bang, a loud thunder-like sound spread in the surrounding area. Both sides had to step back because their equally powerful attacks couldn't do anything to the other side. Yi Shiwen dashed forward and his figure instantly shot out like a shell and collided with the Snow Ape. Boom! 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 And intermittent bursts of huge collision sounds spread while both of them were trying all they could to press down the other one. Snow Ape finally realized that this time, his selection of opponent was wrong and didn't seem like a good deal. One could say that it had chosen a wrong opponent this time, because initially it had thought that he would prove to be a very good opponent to test its newly obtained strength of Xiantian 4th stage. But now, it had become difficult for the Snow Ape to deal with a formidable opponent like Yi Shiwen. However, an ominous aura completely broke out from deep inside the blood vessels of its beastly body, and at this moment, its initially unstable state, after continuously fighting with Yi Shiwen, had begun to show signs of consolidation. The Snow Ape lifted its face upward and began to roar loudly and ferociously. Yi Shiwen couldn't take this lightly because if Snow Ape continued to consolidate its state, then its strength would increase dramatically. But he had earned a great deal of benefit by fighting with this Snow Ape, because after his unceasing collisions with it, at this moment, the initial sturdy barrier on his inner state had slowly begun to loosen up, and his strength had started to rise. The strength of both sides was rising continuously, and the collisions between them had still continued. Both sides were enduring, patiently hoping to completely crush the opposite party in the next attack. Yi Shiwen was not very anxious as he knew that the Snow Ape was going to reach its limit very soon, and once the consolidation of its state would complete, the rise in its strength would come to a stop, but his case was different as he could still have a breakthrough, and after having the breakthrough, his strength would increase by leaps and bounds and then he would be able to kill it. At that time, let alone a demon beast of early Xiantian 4th stage, even the demon beasts of peak Xiantian 4th stage would be easily defeated by him. Snow Ape had never felt so aggrieved. It was already at the Xiantian 4th stage, but it had still been unable to overwhelm a mere human of Xiantian 2nd stage. It was very proud of its unparalleled tough body, but it still couldn't fully prevail over Yi Shiwen, In fact, it had a faint feeling of getting suppressed instead. It didn't know that Yi Shiwen had practiced Tyrant's body technique, and this was the reason why he possessed such a tough body. This was an unparalleled ancient technique used by the ancient tyrant gods to train their bodies. Although Yi Shiwen had practiced it to the second layer, but the toughness of his body had already increased to a very high level. Snow Ape was at a far higher cultivation level compared to Yi Shiwen, but it had still been unable to completely suppress him, and it had also sensed that he had slowly started to become stronger. Moreover, his breath was rising constantly and had started to become more and more thick, which clearly indicated that Yi Shiwen was about to have a breakthrough. Cannot let this human have a breakthrough. A thought echoed in its mind, though it couldn't speak, but its wisdom had increased to a considerable extent after reaching the Xiantian 4th stage, and it could clearly feel how dangerous it would be if Yi Shiwen was allowed to have a breakthrough. Snow Ape no longer hesitated and waved its huge stick, covered in ice-cold aura, which immediately froze the air, and it seemed as if the surrounding area had turned into a world of snow and ice. The huge stick had yet to arrive near Yi Shiwen, but that kind of enormous breath and cold atmosphere fiercely pounded with an irresistible force, as if a huge iceberg had smashed down in front of him. This coercive aura put intense pressure on Yi Ziwen's body, and his bones started to produce crackling sounds as the result of his bones rubbing against each other. Yi Shiwen sneered, and the Zhen Qi began to madly surge inside his body. The long blade danced in his hand and chopped out a dazzling Daomeng. The two imposing attacks met in the midair, staggered, and fiercely collided with each other, causing the Zhen Qi and Yao Qi to mutually evaporate in the air, and erupted the smoke and fireworks everywhere. Yi Ziwen's Daomeng, bit by bit, collapsed under the pressure of Snow Ape's iceberg-like stick, and it pressed down on his body. An enormous imposing aura suddenly broke out like a hurricane from his body, and his original inner state at the peak of Xiantian 2nd stage with 60% transformed Xiantian Zhen Qi, under the intense pressure of this imposing aura, transformed an additional 20% Xiantian Zhen Qi inside his body, reaching 80% Xiantian Zhen Qi, which was now comparable to the transformation of a master at the peak of Xiantian 4th stage. Rising straight from 60% transformed Xiantian Zhen Qi to 80% Xiantian Zhen Qi, Yi Ziwen's aura immediately changed, and the Daomeng that had initially collapsed started to reappear and became even powerful than before, and it suddenly crashed into the iceberg and shattered it into ice fragments which were sent fluttering about in the air. Chapter 111. Jing Yannan. A panic-stricken facial expression appeared on the face of the Snow Ape, and it was looking at Yi Shiwen with a look of horror in its eyes. After having a breakthrough, his fighting strength had suddenly increased to such an extent that now it could be compared with the strength of masters at the peak of Xiantian 4th stage. How could this human become so formidable after having a breakthrough? This also symbolized that the battle efficiency of Yi Shiwen had also made a new breakthrough. However, the Snow Ape was unwilling to give up. This beast was very clever, and it wanted to take advantage of Yi Ziwen's unstable inner state that had yet to consolidate. It was looking for an opportunity to catch him off guard and kill him. A cunning and deceitful look flashed in the blood-red eyes of the Snow Ape, but Yi Shiwen did not make it wait for too long and chopped out his long blade, which blossomed out brilliant, glorious bladiki, shadowing the sky. Yi Ziwen's blade technique had become even more fearsome, and even the Snow Ape had to go all out with rapt attention in the face of this blade attack. The Snow Ape roared, and the snow and ice started swirling in the air and gathered in front of it to form an ice wall, in order to resist Yi Ziwen's blade attack. But this ice wall's defense didn't live up to Snow Ape's expectation, and in an instant, it was cut down into two parts as if cutting a slip of paper, and collapsed down under the formidable power of Yi Ziwen's Daomeng. Puchi! The dazzling Daomeng cut into the body of Snow Ape and chopped its iron-like tough body into two halves, causing its blood to splatter and its flesh to fly in all directions. It died an instant death with an inconceivable look in its eyes. It had just reached the Xiantian 4th stage and had yet to run amok to enjoy the newly gained strength, but it did a blunder by choosing a wrong opponent, and the result was that it was split in half in a single blade attack. Yi Shiwen relaxed and thought that this Snow Ape was really very formidable, and if he had not reached the peak of Xiantian 2nd stage, then it would be very difficult to deal with it. But, after this, a look of joy flashed in his eyes. After all, he had finally reached the peak of Xiantian's second stage. Not just that, he was quite surprised to find out that in just one breakthrough, 80% of the Houtianjin Qi inside his body had transformed into the Xiantianjin Qi, and now, he could easily contend with a master at the peak of Xiantian fourth stage. The next step would be the so-called complete transformation of 100% Houtianjin Qi into Xiantianjin Qi. Then, suddenly, a ray of light dropped from the sky and Yi Shiwen lifted his hand to receive it. It was a message from Yan Qiliang that was received by the summoning talisman. Yi Shiwen used his Zhen Qi to probe inside the talisman and a bunch of information instantly poured into his mind. It was a message from Yan Qiliang. Yi Shiwen didn't waste any time and immediately whistled. The very next instant, the red crown quickly flew down from the sky. For the last 3 days, it had been hovering in the air, ready and waiting to answer the summon call from Yi Shiwen. Riding the red-crowned crane at maximum speed, within half an hour, Yi Shiwen returned to the main sect. Yi Shiwen frowned because just as he had expected, those people from other factions wouldn't give up that easily and had finally come after their Qianyu faction, though not all factions were hostile against them. There were a lot of factions with varying strengths. Some factions were very strong, especially those created by the true disciples, but they only accepted core disciples as members of their factions or extraordinarily talented inner or outer disciples. The moderately powerful factions accepted new disciples and inner disciples as members, and those factions at the bottom of hierarchy accepted outer disciples and even some handyman disciples in their factions. So fortunately, the Qianyu faction created by the new disciples hadn't made all of the factions as its enemy, but even so, it had to face 3 of 4 hostile factions belonging to the Tongtian Peak, as they originally were the competitors. However, this time, they had joined forces to suppress Qianyu faction. Whenever a faction would rise in power, it would generally face resistance from other factions. After Yi Shiwen hurried back to the Tongtian Peak, he didn't see the large number of disciples at the gate, as mentioned in the message sent by Yan Qiliang on his summoning talisman. He was not much worried about the safety of the new disciples. After all, inside the premises of the main sect, those senior disciples wouldn't dare to be too presumptuous, though they might try to bully and oppress the new disciples, but no one would dare to go as far as to kill someone, because once a life was taken, it would probably alarm the high-level personnel. In general, the high-level senior disciples didn't bully the new disciples, and as long as the new disciples didn't cause too much trouble, they wouldn't directly intervene. In their eyes, this was part of the discipline that must be followed in the sect, and they weren't generally interested in mediocre disciples. They were only interested in talented, outstanding disciples because the existence of one outstanding disciple was far more important to them compared to 1,000 mediocre disciples. Therefore, Yi Shiwen wasn't expecting to see a very bad situation and wanted to hurry back in order to stop the situation from escalating. These rival factions needed to know that Qianyu faction wasn't made up of weak people and they could fight back if needed. Yi Shiwen reached the Tongtian Peak and was surprised to find Yan Qiliang talking to a handsome youth clad in elegant Chinese robe. "Brother Yan, what's this all about?" Yi Shiwen asked Yan Qiliang in a surprised tone because he had frantically sent the message to Yi Shiwen some time ago, but now, the things looked pretty normal to him. Seeing that Yi Shiwen had come back, Yan Qiliang's face lighted up and that handsome youth looked at Yi Shiwen with a surprised and curious look in his eyes. Yan Qiliang smiled and said, "Brother Yi, this time, we were lucky that Brother Jing came to help us out." After listening to the explanation of Yan Qiliang, Yi Shiwen finally came to understand that a large number of senior disciples had arrived at the gate and Yan Qiliang had panicked and had frantically messaged Yi Shiwen. But this handsome youth named Jing Yannan came to mediate between them and the opposite party agreed to a temporarily truce. "I want to thank Brother Jing for your help this time." Yi Shiwen cupped one hand over the other across his chest and said in a respectful manner, "No harm, I came at the request of someone to help you." Jing Yannan smiled and said. Yi Shiwen was confused as he couldn't make a guess. Who would actually send help for him? Noticing the confused look on Yi Ziwen's face, Yan Qiliang smiled and said, "You don't need to guess because I will gladly tell you who it was. It was actually Sister Hua who sent us help this time." Chapter 112, Battle After a Month. I want to thank Senior Jing for your help this time. Yi Shiwen cupped one hand over the other across his chest and said in a respectful manner, "No harm, I came at the request of someone to help you." Jing Yannan smiled and said. Yi Shiwen was confused as he couldn't make a guess. Who would actually send him help? Noticing the confused look on Yi Ziwen's face, Yan Qiliang smiled and said, "You don't need to guess because I will gladly tell you who it was. It was actually Sister Hua who sent us help this time." Hua Menghan. This name immediately cropped up in his mind. He never thought that it would actually be Hua Menghan to send him help. At present, the beautiful figure of Hua Menghan seemed to have appeared in the imagination of Yi Shiwen. The news about this matter has spread outside? Yi Shiwen didn't allow his imagination to go astray thinking about the beautiful Hua Menghan and directly asked. "Certainly, considering the involvement of your Qianyu faction in recent incidents, the new disciples of your faction are out in the limelight, and now among the Yiyuan School's 10 peaks, who does not know that a group of audacious newcomers have shown up in the Tongtian Peak?" Jing Yannan said with a faint smile on his face, and his voice seemed to have a touch of ridicule. Yan Qiliang's complexion immediately changed as gaining limelight so early was not a good thing for him as the leader of Qianyu faction. "You are not the first generation of disciples to do such a thing. In the past, one generation of new disciples had tried the same thing and finally entered the Zhendao realm and gained huge popularity, but gaining so much power and popularity corrupted them, and ultimately, things turned out to be very miserable." Jing Yannan said and curiously looked at Yi Shiwen as if trying to know what kind of person he really was by reading his reaction. "A mighty king defeats the invaders," Yi Shiwen said in an indifferent manner. "Ha ha, mighty king defeats the invaders. Well said." Jing Yannan exclaimed and said, "This year's disciples are really different from the past, but your determination and strength is still not enough. Although I helped you this time and forced them to retreat, but they won't stay down for too long and will come after you once again, and at that time, you will have to be capable enough to help yourselves. Senior Jing helped in getting rid of them even once is more than enough for us, and we are very grateful," Yan Qiliang said in a polite tone. Yi Shiwen now had a clear understanding of the mindset of these senior factions, especially those factions that were forcing the new disciples to become their members and were sparing no effort to suppress the Qianyu faction. This was more like a warning to other new disciples indicating that if they tried to from their own factions then the development of their factions would be seriously affected. The new batch of disciples was an important source of members for these senior factions, and they would go to any extent to suppress the new factions just to crush any future rivalry and loss of members. Jing Yannan did not stay, and soon went back. Yan Qiliang somewhat smiled wryly because he never imagined that setting up a new faction would be so difficult, and the interference of senior disciples had made his life difficult as the leader of Qianyu faction. As far as those covetously eyeing senior disciples were concerned, if only he had few more years to cultivate, at least 10 more years, then his strength would have rapid progress. At that time, forming a faction would not be so difficult. In fact, it would come as a natural thing. However, he was not willing to give up, because Qianyu faction was formed just recently, so why must they dissolve it? "Brother Yi, this time, Senior Jing came to our rescue, but the other side has put forward a condition. 1 month later, the deputy main of Fudi faction, Mo Han, will come back, and as long as we can beat him, then in the future, no one will embarrass our Qianyu faction. However, if we can't beat Mo Han, then Qianyu faction must be dissolved," Yan Qiliang said in a somewhat aggrieved tone. "What's the background of this Mo Han?" Yi Shiwen asked because from what he knew so far, Fudi faction had been started by a core disciple, so it was obvious that the deputy main would not be an average disciple. This Mo Han joined the main sect 2 batches before us, which means 6 years ago, and at that time, he became an extremely dazzling talent among the new disciples, and in just a short time of 6 years, he reached the peak of Xiantian 5th stage and became a seed disciple among the inner disciples. It is said that he is very strong, and recognizing his talent, the Fudi faction made an exception to appoint him as deputy main. He is the only inner disciple among the several deputy mains of the Fudi faction, and all other deputy mains are core disciples," Yan Qiliang explained. Talented people always got preferential treatment which reflected in all aspects, and Mo Han's case was the best example of that. I am not willing to give up, Yen Qiliang said in an irritated manner. If only he had few more years, then he was confident that his own strength wouldn't be far too less compared to that of Mo Han. However, he didn't have that much time, as what could he accomplish in just 1 month? You leave this thing to me. 1 month later, I will battle with Mo Han, Yi Shiwen said. You, Yen Qiliang looked somewhat unbelievably at Yi Shiwen. It was not that he suspected the might of Yi Shiwen, and having such an incredible strength at a young age was unusual indeed and proved that Yi Shiwen was truly a genius, but he still couldn't believe that Yi Shiwen could be victorious against Mo Han. Rest assured, trust me and let me handle this matter, Yi Shiwen said, and thought to himself that this thing wouldn't have been so easy to handle, but with the interference of Hua Menghan and Jing Yannen, who came forward to moderate between the two sides, it could be said that it had saved Yi Shiwen a lot of trouble, because now, as long as he could beat this so-called genius Mo Han, Qianyu faction would get recognition from the other factions and people would stop to come looking for trouble, and in that case, he would have enough time for enhancing his own strength. If the battle between him and Mo Han took place right now, then it was obvious that he wouldn't stand a chance against Mo Han, but the battle was going to take place a month later, and at time, the situation would be completely different. Right now, Yi Shiwen was at the peak of Xiantian second stage and his fighting strength was comparable to that of the masters at the peak of Xiantian fourth stage, although it could be said that he had shown the fastest progress among all the new disciples, but his current strength was still not enough to confront Mo Han. However, if he used the Xian Jindan, then his strength would increase by leaps and bounds in a short time, and he would directly reach the peak of Xiantian third stage, and at that time, he would be able to easily contend with a master at the peak of Xiantian fifth stage. So, the showdown with Mo Han would not be a problem at all. But it was going to take time because Xian Jindan was a strong drug and gave extraordinary effects, but it took a lot of time to fully consume it. Fortunately, he had got 1 month's time to prepare for the battle. A month later, let me take care of that Mo Han, Yi Shiwen said. Yen Qiliang was somewhat puzzled at such display of confidence by Yi Shiwen, because even with the help of Xian Jindan, in his view, Yi Shiwen's strength would not increase to such an extent that he would be able to compete with Mo Han. He did not know that Yi Shiwen had just made a huge breakthrough, but Yi Shiwen did not explain and went straight back to his own courtyard and began the closed-door practice. Chapter 113. I bet 5,000 on Yi Ziwen's victory. 1 month passed in an instant, and in this month, Qianyu faction became the center of attention of many high-level and low-level disciples of Tongtian Peak, and not just that, some of the high-level personnel also paid attention to this matter. And Yi Ziwen's name didn't just become famous among the new disciples, but all of a sudden, a lot of people had come to know of his name. From the rumors, they had also become aware of the fact that new disciples had formed a new faction named Qianyu faction and a showdown was going to take place for its sake. The name, Qianyu, had appeared for the first time in the hearts of many people. However, many people were not optimistic about the development of this new faction, because they knew that Yi Shiwen was going to battle with Mo Han, and no one could imagine the victory of Yi Shiwen. After all, Yi Shiwen was just a new disciple, but Mo Han was considered a famous inner disciple and had also entered among the rankings of seed disciples, although from the last. But there were several thousand inner disciples in the main sect, and among them, there were only 100 or so seed disciples. So one could see how powerful Mo Han actually was. For the inner disciples, this was their most essential goal, because as long as they could become one of the few seed disciples, then they could get a lot of school resources. In any of the great sects, talented disciples would always be favored and were given more resources and better care compared to ordinary disciples, and no one thought that this was improper because everyone was like that. Among several thousand inner disciples, being able to attain the rank among the 100 seed disciples, one could imagine the intensity of competition. Even if Mo Han had barely squeezed into the ranks of seed disciples from the bottom, but this was enough to accept the fact that he was extraordinarily strong. And many people were betting on the victory of Mo Han, because looking at his talent, it was only a matter of time when he would actually occupy a higher rank among the seed disciples. But who was Yi Shiwen? He was merely a new disciple who joined the main sect this year. Although he was considered an extraordinary talent among the new disciples, but his cultivation time was very short. If this battle took place few years later, then no one would be able to make a guess about the victor, but right now, no one was betting on Yi Ziwen's victory. Once Yi Shiwen was defeated, then the newly formed Qianyu faction would completely fall apart and would be disbanded according to the terms of the battle. The day of the battle finally arrived, and on this day, the life and death arena of the Tongtian Peak drew a huge crowd and many disciples came to surround the arena. According to the rules of Yiyuan School, life and death battles were only allowed in the life and death arena, and even if a disciple was to die during the battle, it wouldn't violate the regulation of the school. This arena was built for the disciples who wanted to solve their personal hatred through battles, and as long as both sides were willing to participate, they would themselves control their own life and death, generally speaking. Unless there was a bitter hatred and grudge between the two parties, they were not allowed to battle in the life and death arena. Yiyuan School didn't want to evade the fact that in the world of martial artists, hatred and misgivings were inevitable and it was better for them to sort it out in a fair battle in the life and death arena, rather than using unfair means to stab each other's back. Every day, disciples would resolve their grudges and grievances in the life and death arena, but today's battle was one of the most popular ones and had attracted a large crowd. They had come to see the battle between the most famous new disciple, who was representing the new disciples and their newly formed faction, and a famous inner disciple, who had recently joined the ranks of seed disciples and was representing the senior disciples and their factions. For a long time, this kind of situation had not appeared and everyone was curious and excited. Come, the battle's going to start soon, bet on Yi Ziwen's win. If lost then compensation is 10, bet on Mo Han's win. If lost then compensation is 0, 5. A disciple had opened up a gambling house on the side and was shouting loudly. Many disciples started to bet and looking at the odds of the battle, most of them bet on Mo Han's victory, as no one wanted to take a risk and bet on Yi Ziwen's victory, even though the compensation of 10 was very high, because it was no different than betting on a miracle. This is so hateful, how dare you look down on our little brother? A female voice came out from the crowd. Standing in the crowd, there was a pretty woman and appeared to be 20 years old. On her side, stood a handsome youth who appeared to be 23 or 24 years old. They were actually Yi Ruxue and Yi Feng, the two elder siblings of Yi Shiwen. Today, not just the people of Tongtian Peak had gathered around the life and death arena, because this battle had attracted the attention of a lot of people, even from the other 9 peaks. Many disciples from the other 9 peaks had rushed over early in the morning to watch this battle. Yi Ruxue and Yi Feng would naturally come to watch their little brothers fight. In addition to them, the disciples of Qingfeng Mountain Subschool had also come to cheer for Yi Shiwen, because no matter what, he was considered the top disciple of their subschool and had saved them many times. And not just the disciples of Qingfeng Mountain Subschool, the new disciples of other subschools had also come to watch this battle, because in this battle, Yi Shiwen was not just representing the Qianyu faction but all of the new disciples, and he was also a symbol of resistance against the tyranny of senior disciples. All the eyes were fixated on the arena, curiously anticipating the outcome of the battle. Seeing the anger seething on Yi Ruxue's face, Yi Feng smiled wryly, because this was quite normal. Nobody was betting on Yi Ziwen's victory, and the reason was quite obvious to everyone, of course, except Yi Ruxue, because somehow, she always had a lot of confidence on her little brother. Standing beside the two siblings were Yan Qiliang and Zhang Sun Yuan, and others who were on good terms with Yi Shiwen and had come to watch his battle. These senior disciples are really bunch of snobs. Yan Qiliang whispered angrily. Yan Qiliang walked up to the front row of the audience and placed his bet. I bet 300 spirit stones on Yi Ziwen's victory. Yan Qiliang gritted his teeth, but Yi Shiwen was going to fight for the dignity of the new disciples and their faction, so right now, all he could do was show his support. I bet 400. Another loud voice followed the voice of Yan Qiliang and it belonged to Yi Feng. I bet on Yi Ziwen's victory. I bet 100. Yi Ruxue clenched her teeth and said, I bet 30. I bet 10. Seeing this, several top disciples also bet on Yi Ziwen's victory, and many new disciples also joined them and bet in favor of Yi Shiwen. The disciple responsible in the gambling house gave somewhat dumbfounded looks to the people who were betting in favor of Yi Shiwen. He just couldn't understand what made these new disciples to suddenly go crazy, and they started betting on Yi Ziwen's victory, which was simply impossible. Did not they know that they would lose everything? Although the compensation of 10 looked very attractive if won, but there was no chance of winning for Yi Shiwen, so how could they even dare to bet when they knew that they could lose 10 times the bet they were placing? These country bumpkins. The disciples secretly laughed, but there a look of enthusiasm on his face as he warmly received the spirit stones from the new disciples, and with 11 registrations in favor of Yi Shiwen, he also started to look forward to seeing the faces of these country bumpkins once they would lose their bets. Although with one look, it seemed that these people were stupid to be betting on a miracle, but even if they had bet in favor of Mo Han, they wouldn't have won back much with only the compensation of 0. 5. So even if they were fools, it was better to try their luck for once rather than playing it safe. Who else wants to bet? Hurry up, the duel is about to start. The disciple shouted. I bet 5,000 on Yi Ziwen's victory. A slim cyan figure appeared at the entrance. Chapter 114, Victory and Defeat Undecided. I bet 5,000 on Yi Ziwen's victory. A slim cyan figure appeared at the entrance. Yi Feng and others turned to look, and an expression of joy suddenly appeared on their faces. Little brother! Little brother! Brother Yi! Brother Yi! Many new disciples exclaimed with bright looks on their faces. Is that Yi Shiwen too audacious? Indeed, although Mo Han is not the strongest inner disciple, but Yi Shiwen is just a new disciple. You are right, and these newcomers need to see this battle and learn that it will take them several years before they start treating us as equals. Some of the sour senior disciples were discussing and looking down on the new disciples. In any place, there were talented people and mediocre people, and the talented people would speak with their strengths, while the mediocre speak on the basis of their seniority, because they just couldn't get used to seeing these new talented people coming to the main sect. These words were totally disregarded by the people, and Yi Shiwen did not care either. Although seniority was indeed important, but in this world, the strength was the supreme authority, and as long as there was enough strength, what was the use of seniority? Who would care? I bet 5,000 on my victory. Yi Shiwen walked to the front of the gambling disciple and said. After a moment, the disciple very calmly accepted 5,000 spirit stones, though this number was a big and scary figure, because even if it was a master at Xiantian 5th stage, he would have nothing left after betting such a big figure. Only some of the top seed disciples could probably dare to bet such a huge amount of spirit stones like Yi Shiwen, because once lost, they might lose everything. However, if won, then they could easily make 10 times of the bet amount, then their acquired wealth would be comparable to that of many of the core disciples. After the registration, Yi Shiwen directly turned around, and there was no sign of anxiousness on his face as if he had already won the battle. After that, the gambling house closed down and stopped registering any more bets. Although the amount of 50,000 spirit stones was an astronomical figure for inner disciples and even for some core disciples, but when it came to true disciples, this amount was nothing for them. Little brother, you seem to be very confident today. Yi Feng asked. Relax. Yi Shiwen smiled and said, Today, I am going to finish this battle in a moment. The surrounding of the life and death arena was packed with disciples, and it could be described as a sea of people, and not just inner disciples, even a lot of core disciples had come as well to watch this battle. Minute by minute, second by second, time was slowly approaching the initially set time for the battle. Many of the disciples surrounding the life and death arena began to shout and cheer for the contenders, especially the members of Foodie faction, who were cheering for their faction's deputy main, Mo Han. Deputy, kill that arrogant bastard. Let those newcomers know our fierceness. The disciples of the Foodie faction were laughing while the new disciples of the Chenyu faction were glaring at those senior disciples and were extremely angry. On a distant grandstand, opposite the ring, Two figures were standing on top of it and were looking indifferently towards the life and death arena. If Yi Shiwen was present there, he would be surprised to discover that one of the figures was actually the guy who had come to help him last month, Jing Yannan. And at his side stood a black-robed youth, who had a pale face but looked very handsome, and right now, he was staring towards the arena. "Brother Jing, I don't think that Yi Shiwen will dare to come. The battle's going to start any time, but I can't even see even a trace of him anywhere." The black-robed handsome said. "Impossible." Jing Yannan shook his head and said, "Although I have only met him once, but in the end, you need to acknowledge the fact that Sister Hua has a favorable impression of him, and I noticed that his frame of mind is extremely tough and he possesses a very strong willpower. He will die standing rather than kneeling in front of someone. So it's absolutely impossible to think that he is some timid guy who would run away from a fight." "Oh, it's rare for an inner disciple to obtain such high appraisal from Brother Jing," the black-robed handsome youth said in a surprised manner. He just thought that Jing Yannan had come to mediate because Hua Menghan had asked him to do so, but he never expected that Jing Yannan would have such a high evaluation of Yi Shiwen. Jing Yannan lightly smiled and said, "Well, that's because he is a genius among this year's new disciples." "Genius, huh? How many geniuses do you think come and die every year in the Yuan school? What's the use of being a genius if he doesn't get a chance to grow?" The black-robed youth shook his head and said with a smile on his face, "Almost all the disciples who came to join the main sect from various subschools were all considered geniuses in their respective subschools. Back then, they were called the top disciples and were also the well-known disciples, but after joining the main sect and getting grouped with several geniuses coming from across the state, their original fame and title of the genius seemed quite ridiculous. Talented geniuses, these titles were useless if they didn't get a chance to grow and display their real talent and potential. People only remembered the glory of those who were still alive. No one would remember how many bones of the dead geniuses were used in paving the road to fame and glory." Mo Han was also the strongest new disciple back then when he had joined the main sect. "That is the reason why I allowed him to become my faction's deputy main," the black-robed handsome youth said while resting his body against a stone pillar. This black-robed handsome youth was actually the founder of Foodie faction, Qin Muse. It's going to be quite interesting. One is this year's strongest genius, and the other one is the strongest genius from 2 batches ago. Jing Yannan smiled and said, "What's so interesting about it? If this battle took place a few years later, then it will be difficult to guess who wins, but right now, the outcome of this battle has already been decided." Qin Muse indifferently said, Hard to say. Do you know that a few talented new disciples have been awarded the Xian Jindan this year?" Jing Yannan said, and the corners of his mouth slightly curled up. Xian Jindan. Qin Muse suddenly gawked for a moment. He obviously knew about Xian Jindan and its mysterious and profound effects. In fact, it was so precious that even in the main sect, only elite disciples could obtain such a precious item. But, to him, it was useless because a Xian Jindan could only be used by the masters at Xiantian 5th stage or below, and he had crossed the Xiantian 5th stage a long time ago. They are willing to give it to the new disciple? But this is the Xian Jindan. Qin Muse said in a serious manner, "Even if they have given a Xian Jindan to Yi Shiwen, but it will still not change the outcome of this battle." Qin Muse had no words to say anymore. A lot of big personalities came to watch this battle and knew about the terms of this battle. He had made a big decision to allow this battle, and a lot of things depended on it. This was a big turning point, as everyone knew that gratitude and grudges were part of life and things had already become worse for senior and new disciples. But if Yi Shiwen was defeated in the battle, then they would be able to suppress the new factions without any interference, and new disciples would have to bitterly accept it without any resistance. He knew that this year's batch was filled with several genius disciples, and he would be able to obtain them as his faction's members. This battle was a great opportunity, and he could reap a lot of benefits for his faction, and this was the fundamental reason why he accepted the mediation of Jing Yannan. At this time, during their conversation, Foodie faction's deputy main, this battle's other contender, Mo Han, finally appeared. Chapter 115, Xiantian Shao successfully achieved. Emo Han was a tall warrior with grandiose stature, clad in brilliant clothing, stout, and there was grim look on his face. "Where's Yi Shiwen? Why has he not appeared yet?" Emo Han asked in a cold voice. "Maybe he is scared to come up in the arena," the members of the Foodie faction said with ridicule. "Ha ha ha." The members of Foodie faction burst out in a loud laughter. "Why don't I find this joke funny?" A calm and clear voice suddenly came from the crowd and interrupted the laughter of the members of Foodie faction. Yi Shiwen slowly walked out of the crowd and looked indifferently at Emo Han. "You finally came. Good, you did not let me down," Emo Han said in a callous tone. Although he didn't care, but if he paid attention he would have sensed that Yi Ziwen's body was exuding somewhat restless aura which was very intense. With Yi Shiwen in the arena, it seemed as if the atmosphere was instantly lit up and the enthusiasm of everyone present on the scene also heated up. "Deputyman, teach that arrogant brat about the profoundness of this world." "Deputyman, come on." The members of the Foodie faction clamored loudly and started cheering for Emo Han. Emo Han didn't speak anything, and without giving any time to Yi Shiwen to gain a foothold, his body instantly launched like an arrow towards Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen was well prepared and didn't want to be outdone by him. He took a step and his figure disappeared and went skimming towards Emo Han, and his palm rumbled. In the arena, the two shadows of these contenders passed over gently and swiftly like lightning, like two meteors in general, and in a flash, they crashed into each other and produced a loud collision along with a huge explosion, and right at that time, the two share of vigorous Yantian Jinqi suddenly erupted, and under the fury of their fierce strengths, cracks instantly appeared even on the hard floor of the arena. Bang bang! A low and deep sound spread in the arena and their shadows immediately retreated back, and in this round of battle, no one could understand who won, because it was like a clash between two equally powerful challengers and no one actually won in this round of battle. In the eyes of both of the contenders, there was a color of surprise, especially Emo Han. He was totally stunned because he did not expect that Yi Shiwen would be able to directly take on his attack, and even after the fierce collision between them, Yi Shiwen looked absolutely normal, as if it was not at all strenuous for him. In fact, he actually quite easily received Emo Han's blow. Yi Shiwen was also surprised because he did not think that Emo Han would be so strong, obviously stronger than what he anticipated. Emo Han pulled out a pitch-black long spear from his storage ring. The spear point was flashing and was surrounded with a cold and threatening aura, and like a viper came out of the hole, it instantly dashed towards Yi Shiwen and immediately came in front of him, and just when it arrived right in front of him, it released several spear shadows at him. Yi Shiwen also instantly pulled out the long blade from the scabbard on his back, and the long blade started to dance in his hand, producing several blade shadows dancing in the arena, which then moved forward to welcome the incoming attack. Clang! The crisp sound of metal clashing resounded along with sparks from the collision between the two that spread throughout the arena. Yi Ziwen's long blade fiercely collided with the spear of Emo Han, and their enormous strengths could be felt by everyone present on the scene. The visible ripples of shock waves were continuously pouring out of the arena, and in a flash, the two figures exchanged several blows which happened so fast that it was difficult for many spectators to track with their eyes. After exchanging many blows, they drew back several steps. "Your strength is pretty good, but you are still too tender and amateur," Emo Han said, and the spear in his hands shook slightly, as if a viper was preparing to bite at any time. The water in the main sect is very deep. It's not a place where a newcomer can just come and act unreasonably. What utter nonsense! Even if this place has deep water, I will still keep trying and temper myself to go deeper, Yi Shiwen indifferently said. "If that's the case, then you can't blame me." Emo Han shouted loudly, and his strength of peak Xiantian 5th stage completely broke out, and an aggressive aura came out of his body and completely wrapped the entire arena. Yi Shiwen was also not going to be outdone, and the very next instant, an equally powerful and even slightly more intense aura completely erupted from his body and spread throughout the arena. In this month, it was impossible for Yi Shiwen to have not done anything. After taking a dose of Xian Jindan, in a short time, Yi Ziwen's cultivation reached the peak of Xiantian 3rd stage, And he also transformed 100% of Houtianjin Qi present in his body into Xiantianjin Qi, which in turn greatly increased his battle efficiency. During this month, at last, he finally consolidated Celestial Step and fully grasped it to the Deshang realm. And finally, he also practiced Full Moon Beheader to the Deshang realm. Now, he finally succeeded in reaching the Deshang realm of all the moves of Cold Moon Beheader. Yi Zaiwen's secret technique, the hardest to practice, his last trump card technique, Coiling Dragon Palm, and its first move Hidden Dragon Rises from the Abyss was also practiced to the Deshang realm. In other words, now, among all of the martial arts techniques that Yi Shiwen had practiced so far, only Tyrant Body Technique was practiced to the second layer, and that too only to the Xiaocheng realm. Except this, he had already practiced all other techniques to the Deshang realm. After reaching the Xiaocheng realm of the second layer of Tyrant Body Technique, at present, Yi Zaiwen's strength directly broke through the strength of 99 dragons, attainable only by the masters at the peak of Xiantian 5th stage, and reached the strength of 100 dragons. This was the strength attainable only by the masters who successfully achieved the Xiantian Shao state. However, by virtue of the mysterious effects of Tyrant Body Technique, Yi Shiwen was able to achieve the Xiantian Shao state and obtain the strength of 100 dragons. Xiantian Shao state was the state right above the peak Xiantian 5th stage. When a warrior converted 100% of the Houtianjin Qi present in his body into Xiantianjin Qi, he reached the peak of Xiantian 5th stage, but some people could go even further. After reaching the peak of Xiantian 5th stage and transforming 100% Xiantianjin Qi, the warrior would feel the Xiantianjin Qi flowing in all parts of his body, and even a swing of arm would display the strength of 99 dragons. And after going a step further and achieving the strength of 100 dragons, although there was a difference of only one dragon's strength, but the overall display of strength would greatly change. Those at the Xiantian Shao state were a lot stronger than those at the peak of Xiantian 5th stage, so Yi Zaiwen's fighting strength was now stronger than ever in its top condition, and now he was fully able to easily compete with a master at the Xiantian Shao realm. And Mo Han was only at the peak of Xiantian 5th stage. In the arena, both Long Blade and Spear were releasing bright rays of light in abundance, and suddenly, the next instant, the two experts dashed towards each other, and under the gazes of several spectators, it seemed as if a violent storm swept out of nowhere, and in a blink of an eye, the two figures violently clashed. Boom! Two dazzling figures severely collided with each other, causing a surge of terrifying air explosion from the tips of their weapons, and maliciously initiated a loud blast, which bloomed like a lotus flower in the arena, and the very next instant, the blast that had bloomed like a lotus instantly exploded and sent shock waves in all directions. Pang! A figure retreated several steps in the life and death arena, leaving deep footprints on the arena, and left wide cracks on the solid floor of arena. The blast dispersed, and everyone saw that the explosion pushed back a figure, and it continuously drew back several steps away, and to everyone's surprise, it turned out to be Mo Han. Everyone called out in alarm. This was simply impossible, because under the blast of this violent collision, the one who was pushed back was actually Mo Han, instead of Yi Shiwen. Above the stand, Qin Muse's eyes were stubbornly staring at Yi Shiwen, with a panic-stricken look on his face, and muttered, "How is this possible? Just how is this possible?" At his side, Jing Yannan was also incomparably astonished. Although a moment ago he talked in favor of Yi Zaiwen's strength and potential, but he definitely did not expect that Yi Shiwen would actually be able to largely prevail over Mo Han, which left him totally dumbstruck. In the crowd surrounding the arena, the disciples of Fudi faction and Qianyu factions had unbelievable expressions on their faces. But, for disciples of Qianyu faction, it was more like an unquenchable pleasant surprise, although they did not know how Yi Shiwen suddenly became so strong, but there was no doubt that he was the hope of their faction and would successfully protect the Qianyu faction. Chapter 116, Yi Shiwen wins. There was an awkward expression on Mo Han's face as he firmly stood on the periphery of the arena, unable to hide the consternation on his face. His present state was the result of the collision between him and Yi Shiwen, And it turned out to have such an outcome, because just now, he finally came to understand the tyrannical strength of his opponent and was going through the state of reality shock. Brother Yi is really a monster, Zhang Yang said with an amazed look in his eyes. Yi Feng was also incredibly looking at his younger brother. His brother unbelievably displayed such an amazing progress and completely left him behind. Originally, during this month, he was anxious and came over to talk to Yi Shiwen many times regarding this battle. He was extremely worried and concerned about Yi Shiwen. After all, this situation of facing suppression from the senior disciples was not a new thing. This had happened many times in the past as well, and every time new disciples joined the main sect, there were always some proud and ambitious new disciples who would try to form their own banner, but each time, their efforts would be completely crushed by the senior factions. Although, it was said that a lot of genius new disciples joined the main sect, but it didn't make much difference because they were still weak compared to the senior disciples. But for the new disciples, this was a battle for their dignity. Yi Shiwen was fighting not just for saving the existence of Qianyu faction, but also to safeguard the dignity of the new disciples, and once he won, new disciples would be able to save their dignity, and those senior disciples would also have to accept that they must not look down on the new disciples. Like Yi Shiwen got a Xian Jindan from the Tongtian Peak for performing well in the assessment exam, Yi Feng had also been rewarded with a Xian Jindan, and for past 1 month, he tried his best to meet Yi Shiwen and to give his own Xian Jindan to Yi Shiwen, but couldn't meet him. Yi Shiwen was engaged in closed-door training and had strictly said that no one would disturb him for this 1 month's time. Yi Feng knew that Yi Shiwen also had a Xian Jindan, and if coupled with his own, he would have 2 Xian Jindan. Then there was still hope that in a short time, he might be able to break into the Xiantian 5th stage. Although Xian Jindan was very precious, but in his mind, how could it be more important than his precious little brother? But he did not expect that in such a short time, Yi Ziwen's battle strength would increase to such a terrifying extent. Although, originally, in his mind, Yi Shiwen had always been a strong existence, but he never knew the exact extent of his talent. Only now did he finally come to understand that by using just 1 Xian Jindan, Yi Shiwen was able to surpass a master at the peak of Xiantian 5th stage. He had been unable to meet Yi Shiwen, and like everyone else, he was also totally bewildered. Yi Feng knew that this feat was absolutely not achievable for other disciples. After all, in order to break through to the peak of Xiantian 3rd stage and also to master various martial arts techniques, a Xian Jindan was not enough, and Yi Shiwen had to consume at least 2,000 spirit stones, and without the help of Xian Jindan, he would have to spend 4,000 spirit stones, and even after that, there was no guarantee to attain such a feat. Even after endless consumption of spirit stones, he had to push himself to the absolute limit to gain his current terrifying strength. Mo Han gradually approached Yi Shiwen and his aura continued to increase dramatically. Clutching the spear in his hands and pointing its tip at Yi Shiwen, he was staring firmly at Yi Shiwen. Suddenly, in the arena, in the range of 10 steps around Mo Han's body, a burst of strong Xiantian Jinqi rushed out from his body and flooded the arena. Mo Han heavily trod on the floor of the arena, with the spear on the front, and it seemed as if his physique was taking shape of a spear, and on the spear tip, Xiantian Jinqi rapidly began to condense. Combined with his incredible aura flooding out from his body, and his spear stacked with the Xiantian Jinqi, it seemed like his body had almost fused together with his spear. A unified man-spear literally went piercing through the air, producing a chi-chi sound, and rushed towards Yi Shiwen. This was not just the incredible might of peak Xiantian 5th stage. This was actually the man-spear unification. After getting cornered by Yi Shiwen, Mo Han felt pressurized, and due to that, he was able to reach a realm that only few people were able to reach, although only for a little while, but there was no doubt that it not only increased his combat strength, it was also going to become a great advantage for his practice. The man-spear unification. Once again, looking at this scene, the members of Foodie faction suddenly became excited and started cheering for their deputy main, and the new disciples of Qianyu faction were in inexplicable horror. Becoming one with the spear was a realm only a handful people could achieve, and after achieving this state, the strength attained was not a joke. There were those who practiced martial arts for a lifetime but still couldn't achieve the realm of man-spear unification. For an expert to reach this realm, he would need to comprehend numerous levels of understanding about the weapon's martial arts technique, and inherent talent was also a must. Facing a terrifying opponent like Yi Shiwen, Mo Han was unable to cope up with him and was forced into a corner, and under such a pressurized state, he finally achieved the realm of unity with his spear, which shocked everyone who was watching this battle, especially the members of the Foodie faction. Good. Qin Muse looked at Mo Han, suddenly laughed loudly and said, "I value worthy people." Man-spear unification. Among so many disciples in the Yuan school, not many could reach this state. Even if it was only for a brief moment, he would attain great strength. He never thought that a member of his own faction would be able to attain such a rare realm. Qin Muse was extremely happy and suddenly laughed. Now, even if Mo Han lost in the battle and his faction lost face, he wouldn't care because thanks to this battle, he could gain such a formidable deputy main for his faction, so in the end, this was not that big of a loss. Do not get too happy, Jing Yannan said to Qin Muse. Facing the fierce attack of Mo Han, Yi Shiwen did not directly clash with him this time, because the strength of man-spear unification was enormous, and even if it was just for a moment, direct confrontation was unwise, so with a burst of Zhen Qi under his feet, his figure instantly and strangely disappeared from the spot he was standing. Mo Han's man-spear unification attack was aimed at Yi Shiwen, but with a sudden loss of target, his complexion immediately changed, because the serious flaw of this man-spear unification attack was that it was necessary to clearly pinpoint the target, but right that instant, he just saw a faint trace of cyan-colored figure and was instantly alarmed. An idea flashed like lightning in Mo Han's mind, and he suddenly turned 180 degrees along with his spear, and violently thrust his spear towards the blind spot behind him. Pierce! A crisp sound resounded and sparks scattered everywhere under the horrifying display of strength, and their two shares of fierce Yantian Jin Qi started to continuously spread out. Mo Han had immediately turned back and thrust his spear at the long blade chopped out at his back, and at this time, the long blade contained a tyrannical strength, and it turned out to be so massive that the spear actually bent a little under its terrifying weight. Yi Ziwen's figure finally appeared behind the long blade and there was a faint smile on his face, because this man-spear unification attack was indeed very powerful, but in the end, the final victory depended on who successfully displayed his full strength. The sudden disappearance of Yi Shiwen failed Mo Han's initial attack, and right now, he was almost caught off guard by Yi Shiwen. Mo Han was incomparably scared because even after achieving the man-spear unification, he was still getting pressed down by Yi Shiwen and couldn't fully take hold of the battle as he originally intended to. Without any hesitation, Yi Shiwen immediately chopped out his long blade fiercely against Mo Han, which produced an extremely oppressive piercing sound, and encompassing the heavy and terrifying strength within itself. The long blade danced in his hand and heavily clashed with the spear of Mo Han and immediately deflected it to one side, and Mo Han was forcefully pushed away by the terrifying strength present in Yi Ziwen's blade strike. And right this instant, Mo Han felt pressurized and couldn't maintain his man-spear unification state and came out of it. After coming out of man-spear unification realm, the outcome of this battle immediately became apparent to everyone. Mo Han was blasted all the way back, and Yi Shiwen took advantage of this and mercilessly swung the backside of his long blade at him. Bang! Mo Han was severely thrown back and directly went flying out of the arena several meters away. Everyone was silent. Yi Shiwen won. Chapter 117. Comparable to seed disciples, a silence spread on the scene, and many people had complicated feelings in their hearts. They never expected this outcome, but they just witnessed the display of Yi Ziwen's incredible strength, which simply left them flabbergasted. A moment ago, Mo Han successfully achieved the man-spear unification and reignited their hopes of his comeback, but within a flash, he was so easily beaten by Yi Shiwen that it was simply unacceptable. Even if his strength increased by leaps and bounds after entering into the realm of man-spear unification, he still couldn't change anything and thoroughly lost the battle. Qianyu faction was made up of only new disciples, and the past few months were the most difficult times for them, But now, at least no one would bully them anymore, which was the result of the terms of battle, and many powerful influences were witnessed to them. The new disciples of Qianyu faction as well as other new disciples were happily shouting in abundance. To them, this was simply a miracle. They won. They actually won. He actually won the battle against Mo Han. You know, Mo Han's name was once on the list of the seed disciples, and even if now he is not in the ranking list of seed disciples, but he can still be considered a quasi-seed level disciple. But didn't you just see that during the battle, Mo Han entered into the realm of man-spear unification, but he was still blasted away by Yi Ziwen's blade. These new disciples are really too tyrannical, and this Yi Shiwen is almost comparable to those seed disciples. How can this new disciple be such an evildoer? He had just joined the main sect, and his strength is already comparable to that of those seed disciples. You know, almost all of the seed disciples are evildoers and are masters of the Xiantianshao realm. On a high platform a distant place from the arena, Qin Yu's turned around and did not continue to look towards the arena and lightly said, "Well, this time I misjudged." However, right now, there was smile hanging on his face. He witnessed the amazing potential of Yi Shiwen and he saw it with his own eyes. Who is Yi Shiwen? Just a new disciple who joined the main sect few months ago, and he easily defeated a master of peak Xiantian 5th stage, and looking at his incredible potential, it was not hard to guess that he would undoubtedly become a true disciple in the future. And if Fudi faction would have continued to irritate Yi Shiwen and his faction, then he might have settled scores with their faction in the future, so it was definitely a very wise choice to allow this battle. Now, he was aware that he must not offend Yi Shiwen at any cost. Not to mention, due to this battle, his faction's deputy main unexpectedly obtained a formidable new strength of man-spear unification realm, which was definitely a major harvest for this faction. Now, his faction's strength would increase considerably, and looking at this, one could say that he didn't particularly lose much, rather gained a lot. Yi Shiwen came out of the arena, and immediately, the happy-looking new disciples of Qianyu faction surrounded him and started to exclaim loudly and chaotically. It was the time of celebration for them, and Yi Shiwen immediately became the center of their attention. "Brother Yi, this time we really want to thank you," Yan Qiliang said in a pleasantly surprised tone. He just never thought that Yi Shiwen would really be able to win. Now, it was getting difficult for him to digest this fact that Yi Shiwen won and his Qianyu was safe now, and so was his position as its leader. Before Yi Shiwen could say something, Yi Rushue said in a somewhat proud manner, "That was naturally expected. Whose little brother you think he is?" Yi Shiwen didn't know whether to laugh or cry after hearing his sister's remark. Was she trying to praise him, or boasting about herself? Unlike these people, Yi Rushue was the only one who was least worried about Yi Shiwen and had extraordinary confidence in him. "Let's go everyone and collect the spirit stones we just won." At this time, the disciples of Qianyu faction shouted together. While shouting and celebrating the victory of Yi Shiwen, everyone suddenly remembered that this time, they didn't just win their dignity and independence, but also a lot of spirit stones. An intense anger was suppressed inside them after continuously getting bullied by the senior disciples, but in a flash, it all disappeared thanks to Yi Shiwen, and in addition to that, they also earned back a lot of spirit stones. A compensation of 10 was placed on Yi Shiwen, and now that he won, everyone who bet in his favor won 10 times the amount of bet spirit stones. For these new disciples, this was not a small fortune. In fact, it was a large sum of money, and could be said that they became rich overnight, which made these disciples even happier. Of course, some disciples earned more compared to other, like Yi Feng and Yi Rushue, who bet a lot of spirit stones in favor of Yi Shiwen and got 10 times in return. Suddenly, they became very rich, one of the wealthiest inner disciples. Of course, among these people, the one who earned the most was Yi Shiwen. He had bet 5,000 spirit stones in his favor, and now, all of a sudden, it increased tenfold, reaching 50,000 spirit stones. This amount was so huge that it could be said that for many disciples, this was equivalent to their lifetime accumulated wealth. Even for Yi Shiwen, this wealth was enough to help him practice to the Xiantian 5th stage or above, and he would still not have to worry about spirit stones. No wonder, even those true disciples opened gambling houses to amass money, because this money-making speed was simply terrifying. Although Yi Shiwen earned a lot this time, but the one who made the most profit was actually the gambling disciple, because he kept all the spirit stones bet in favor of Mo Han, and a lot of people had bet huge amounts of spirit stones in his favor. Although the gambling house must pay 10 times compensation to Yi Shiwen and others who bet in his favor, but only a few people had bet in favor of Yi Shiwen, so even after paying 10 times the spirit stones to them, the gambling house still earned a lot of spirit stones. If it was a core disciple, then with so much spirit stones, he would become filthy rich overnight. But behind these gambling houses were actually the true disciples, and although the earned amount was huge, but it was still nothing compared to the riches of a true disciple. All of the new disciples were happy and in a carefree mood. Since joining the main sect, they never got a chance to enjoy like this and were also frequently bullied, especially those who were already in the Xiantian realm in their respective subschools and were considered elite among the elites. But right after joining the main sect, they had to face suppression and were also bullied and felt suffocated in this new environment. Now, at last, they again felt proud and elated, and as long as Yi Shiwen was their leader, who would dare to underestimate this session's newcomers? Now many people were guessing that Yi Ziwen's strength was comparable to that of the seed disciples, the top 100 inner disciples among several thousand inner disciples. By getting counted in the top 100 inner disciples, one could imagine how tyrannical these seed's disciples actually were. These 100 seed disciples were super strong, and even if they were still the inner disciples of the main sect, their strength was tyrannical and had even defeated some of the core disciples, displaying their enormous strength. If a strong expert like Yi Shiwen assumed command over the Qianyu faction, then its base would be rock solid, and at least, no one would come and bully them anymore. It was true that Qianyu faction was nothing more than one of the many factions in the main sect, and it was still nothing. It was a faction created by the new disciples and led by a new disciple, but this battle was like a warning for many other factions that if they tried to suppress Qianyu faction, then they would have to pass through an iron wall named Yi Shiwen, who held the potential to become a true disciple in the future. However, after seeing Yi Ziwen's tyrannical strength, those senior disciples finally realized that he was not a chicken, but a lion, although still young, but already had fangs and claws, and if they were not careful then it could scratch and hurt them. Yi Shiwen already knew about the matter of seed disciples, and even it was true that his strength was now comparable to that of those seed disciples, but they were extremely strong and many had even beaten some of the core disciples. They simply stood at the pinnacle of inner disciples, and Yi Shiwen was still a new disciple. Yi Shiwen. When everyone was celebrating his victory, Mo Han's voice came from behind. Although I lost to you this time, but after 3 months, in the Seed Disciples tournament, I will defeat you and take revenge for today. Chapter 118, by Ma Jiao. Although I lost to you this time, but after 3 months, in the Seed Disciple tournament, I will defeat you and take revenge for today. Mo Han looked at Yi Shiwen and said, there were only 100 seed inner disciples in the Yiyuan school, but it was not fixed. Almost every year, there would be a seed disciple tournament and thousands of disciples would participate in this tournament to compete for the title of seed disciple, and not just because the title of a seed's disciple was pleasant to hear, but their treatment and welfare was far better than many of the core disciples. Mo Han's words clearly implied that Yi Shiwen had enough strength that after 3 months, he would definitely be able to participate in the seed disciple tournament, but after reaching the realm of man-spear unification, he was now confident that after 3 months, his own strength would increase once again by leaps and bounds, and he would certainly enter into the realm of Xiantian Shao, and at that time, he would be stronger than Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen had also heard about the Seed Disciple Tournament, because for inner disciples, to be able to become a seed disciple was a great achievement, and deep down in their hearts, all of them wanted to become seed disciples. Every year, during the Seed Disciple Tournament, new participant would come to try their luck and achieve this glory of shining above the others. Yi Shiwen never thought that he would be able to participate in the Seed Disciple Tournament in such a short period of time. Earlier, in his plans, he anticipated that he might be able to participate in Seed Disciple Tournament in coming 5 years, but he never expected to have such a high-speed progress in strength. No wonder so many people came to practice in the main sect, where the advancement in cultivation was way faster compared to the sub-schools, to the point of inconceivable rate of progress. After saying those words, Mo Han did not wait for Yi Zaiwen's answer, and under the supporting arms of the disciples of Fudi faction, he immediately left. Seed Disciple Tournament? Many disciples of Qianyu faction slightly gawked and were totally surprised after hearing the words of Mo Han. It was by no means that they didn't know how big a tournament it actually was, but it was still a long way from them. Even for geniuses like Yi Feng and others, at least 5-6 years were needed to become strong enough to have any chance in the Seed Disciple Tournament. As to them, even the span of 30 or 40 years was nothing in comparison to the lifespan of 200 years granted by the Xiantian realm. Little brother, you must participate in this Seed Disciple Tournament. It would be awesome if you enter into the ranks of top 100 inner disciples, especially for the reputation of us new disciples. Yi Ruxue patted the shoulder of Yi Shiwen and said. At the same time, nearby, a somewhat depressed senior disciple was thinking that defeating Mo Han was not enough. Now he was planning to participate in the Seed Disciple Tournament. In the last 100 years, a new disciple had never been so audacious. Yi Shiwen listened, smiled, but did not say anything because at his current state, he would be able to participate in the Seed Disciple Tournament, but he would have to struggle a bit while fighting the Seed Disciples, and even after that, he would not be able to come in the top ranks, only hanging in the end. Although for the new disciples, it was still glorious enough, but for Yi Shiwen, it was only better than nothing. Everyone went to the establishment of the gambling disciple, who had just now made a great fortune thanks to the unexpected victory of Yi Shiwen, and with a refreshing look on his face, he paid 10 times the bet spirit stones to those who had bet in favor of Yi Shiwen. After betting 5,000 spirit stones and winning 50,000 spirit stones back, all of a sudden, Yi Shiwen became filthy rich overnight, and many senior disciples were looking enviously at him. Yi Shiwen didn't mind them and quickly put all the 50,000 spirit stones into his storage ring. After receiving so many spirit stones for a long time, Yi Shiwen would not have to worry about the consumption of the spirit stones. From the time he crossed through to this world, Yi Shiwen himself had to admit that his earning rate was very fast, but his spending speed of spirit stones was even faster, almost fast to the point of exaggeration from the point of view of an ordinary disciple, and even if it was a core disciple, they would also find this consumption rate nothing less than exaggeration. But the requirements of the special space were just too great to sate for Yi Shiwen. Even if Yi Shiwen must go all out on the road to desperately earn the spirit stones, he would still be able to practice faster than others after gaining the spirit stones. However, for other disciples, if they constantly move back and forth on the road to earning spirit stones, then they would certainly see a significant decline in their practice speed. In addition to that, their absorption rate of spirit stones was also very slow. Only Yi Shiwen could desperately earn spirit stones while maintaining a very fast practice speed. Moreover, for Yi Shiwen, the more the spirit stones, the faster his practice speed would be, so one could say that he was an exception who could display such a kind of unique way of rapid practice speed and strength growth. When Yi Shiwen, the representative of Qianyu faction, formed by the new disciples, defeated Mo Han, many enemy factions, who were originally against the Qianyu faction, publicly declared that they wouldn't cause any more troubles for Qianyu faction. And after that, Qianyu faction went on a path to rapid expansion, because in addition to the disciples of Tongtian Peak, all of a sudden, its reach extended towards the other 9 top peaks as well. The new disciples of this year's 7 high-ranked subschools joined the Qianyu faction. Moreover, more than 30% of states' major influences also joined the Qianyu faction. In a short time, the member count of Qianyu faction exceeded the mark of 1,000, and soon reached the mark of more than 2,000 disciples. Suddenly, Qianyu faction gained a prestige among the other faction, and this attracted the attention of a lot of disciples. The new disciples felt a natural sense of intimacy towards the Qianyu faction compared to other factions, although they all knew that as far as development was concerned, the Qianyu faction was just an emerging faction and was naturally not comparable to the senior factions, and the potential for their own development would also be restricted if they joined the Qianyu faction. If they could join the other factions, then they might have a better chance of growth, But these new disciples had been cultivated as geniuses in their respective subschools and other outside influential clans and wanted to build their career themselves through hard work. In addition to that, Qianyu faction had Yi Shiwen, whose strength was comparable to those seed disciples, so it naturally attracted many people to come. Also, this year's top new disciples like Yan Qiliang, Yi Feng and Zhang Sunyuan had also joined the Qianyu faction, and their reputations also worked towards attracting the attention of a lot of new disciples. However, so far, only new disciples had joined the Qianyu faction, while the senior disciples were still waiting and watching from the sidelines. When the disciples of Qianyu faction were excited at the sudden fame, development and expansion of Qianyu faction, suddenly, a rumor quickly spread throughout the Yuan school. After remaining dormant for 100 years, the followers of Bai Majiao finally appeared once again on a large scale in many parts of the Great Yu state. The news suddenly caused sudden uproar in the Yuan school. When Yi Shiwen heard this news, he got a feeling of storm clouds approaching. The matter about the Bai Majiao rapidly started to spread in the Yuan school and stirred the new disciples. The senior disciples, who had spent almost 100 years in the main sect, began to explain things about the Bai Majiao to the new disciples. 100 years ago, Bai Majiao was a big organization of devil worshippers that had proliferated throughout the Zhen Wujie. In Zhen Wujie, the prestigious clans and sects didn't strictly discriminate between Xiedao and Modao. For example, Shuling's sect, one of the 4 large sects of the Great Yu state, was considered as sect of Xiaomawedo, but was still ranked among one of the 4 large sects. Chapter 119 Young Marquis Shuling's sect, one of the 4 large sects, was considered as the largest sect where Xiedao was practiced by the disciples, and there were rumors that long time ago, in Zhen Wujie, Modao didn't exist and humans practiced only Xiedao. According to legend, long time ago, the devil world had invaded Zhen Wujie and had caused havoc in this world. It was a great disaster, and although Devil World's attack was repulsed, but during the long duration of this major cataclysm, Devil World had succeeded in sowing the seeds of Modao in Zhen Wujie, giving birth to the existence of devil warriors. When the Devil World had invaded Zhen Wujie, many human warriors had fallen prey to the magic of devil race and had been confused, which degenerated their morality, causing them to become depraved warriors, and also started practicing the Modao and devil race's power techniques, which were also practiced by the Modaoists nowadays. In Zhen Wujie, the disciples who practiced Xiedao were not considered depraved by the people, but the disciples who practiced Modao were not accepted by the society, and Modaoists were not welcomed by most people. In fact, among all the sects who taught Modao to their disciples, Bai Majiao was the most notorious one. Bai Majiao, as the name suggested, was an organization whose sole motive was to spread the religion of worshipping the devil and advocating the devil world's rule in Zhen Wujie. It was said that the lord of Bai Majiao was actually dedicated to the sovereign king of devil world, and there were also many legends about great devil lords, devil gods, etc. Bai Majiao's main objective was to use any means to open the doors of this world for the devil race to come in from the devil world, so it was no wonder that everyone was panicking by the sudden return of Bai Majiao. Hundreds of years ago, Bai Majiao had staged a rebellion in the Great Yu state, and many large forces had collaborated to suppress this rebellion. No one expected that just 100 years later, Bai Majiao would revive once again and started causing trouble. Regarding Bai Majiao, many disciples did not have favorable impression. After all, no one wanted to fight with the devil race. Then, several rumors and news spread throughout the Yuan school, and overnight, various matters related to Bai Majiao were dug out and came in front of everyone, including the case where many sub-school disciples had been attacked and disappeared on the way to the main sect, and now the news spread that it was also Bai Majiao's doing. And with the unexpected resurfacing of a notorious organization like Bai Majiao, Yuan school and other major powers would collaborate together to completely crush Bai Majiao. All sorts of Bai Majiao-related missions could be seen hanging in the Gongda Palace. Rewards were also very high. For beheading a Hotian level Bai Majiao follower, one could get a reward of 1 spirit stone, and for beheading Xiantian level Bai Majiao followers, one could receive 10 to 100 spirit stones as reward. However, for beheading a Xiantian 5th stage follower or above, the reward was quite high, in the range of 100 to 1,000 spirit stones. It could be said that with the sudden re-emergence of Bai Majiao, it was as if Yi Yuan school was literally bleeding money to subjugate them before the situation got worse. For so many spirit stones as reward, Yi Shiwen was also very excited, because compared with his own ways of accumulation of spirit stones using various means, which were quite slow, it was rather convenient for him to behead the Bai Majiao followers and gain a lot of spirit stones as rewards, and not just that, his cultivation would also strive and increase in his fights with them. And the spirit stones received as rewards would eventually also accelerate his cultivation growth, so it could be described as achieving several results in one fell swoop. After making the decision, Yi Shiwen didn't hesitate any longer and immediately went to the Gongda Palace of the main sect. No matter how many times he came to the Gongda Palace, he would still feel amazed looking at its grandiose compared to the Gongda Palace of Qingfeng Mountain Subschool, which looked insignificant in comparison. Because of Bai Mojiao's matter, Yuan School's main sect had given out many missions, and they were currently being displayed in the Gongda Palace. Many disciples were frequently coming to pick up Bai Majiao-related missions. Yi Shiwen took a close look at these missions. There were missions about probing the hideouts of Bai Majiao in the Great Yu State, beheading the followers of Bai Majiao who had already appeared and started to rebel in certain regions. Each of these missions had different difficulty levels, and people were naturally choosing missions according to their own capabilities. Yuan School was unusually attaching great importance to this matter of comeback of Bai Majiao, because reportedly, hundreds of true disciples had already taken nearly half of the high-difficulty missions and went to different regions of the Great Yu State to behead those devil worshippers. Yi Shiwen swept his eyes through the missions and chose a suitable one in which a master was required to trample the stronghold of Bai Majiao followers. He must start immediately because one person was allowed to take only one mission, and this time, due to the special matter of Bai Majiao, there was no time limit on the missions and one could accept missions until the last Bai Majiao-related mission was successfully completed. He needed to act fast and now itself, otherwise any more delay would incur serious losses for him, as he might lose the chance to earn as many spirit stones as he could during this Bai Majiao uproar. He left the Gongda Palace and arrived halfway up the mountainside. "Are you the one named Yi Shiwen?" At this time, a somewhat contemptuous voice resounded from behind. Yi Shiwen turned to look. Not far away from him, 7 or 8 disciples were standing in a group, led by a dignified and imposing-looking youth. On his face, there was a sort of arrogance and disdain. However, Yi Shiwen was quite surprised to find that the disciples behind that arrogant youth were actually those 7 masters whom he had run into during the assessment examination. The so-called inevitable clash between the enemies, and even if originally there was nothing between the two sides, but now, it could be said that this enmity had become quite strong. "I am," Yi Shiwen indifferently said. Yi Shiwen glanced at them, and after reaching the Deshang realm of restraining breath technique, without putting any effort, he completely understood the breaths of these people. He instantly saw through their strengths, and according to his estimation, the youth who seemed to be leading this group had entered one step into the Xiantian Shao realm. And even the strength of those 7 masters, who had intercepted him during the assessment examination, had shown great progress, and all of them had reached the peak of Xiantian 3rd stage. These sharp-eyed disciples, with their blade-like sharp gazes, were looking at Yi Shiwen, and it seemed as if their gazes would cut open a hole in his body. It was said some experts could use their gazes to kill people, and it was not a myth. There were a lot of masters whose gazes could congeal a piercing attack that could instantly kill a person. "Yi Shiwen, standing in front of you is the young Marquis. How dare you not kneel down to greet him?" Among the 7 people, the diminutive youth coldly said to Yi Shiwen with a flash of hatred in his eyes. "What a joke! This is a Yuan school, and you actually want to use power to fetter me. Whatever he is, he cannot make me kneel down in front of anyone." Yi Shiwen sneered and said. Yi Shiwen reckoned that there were a lot of children in the imperial family of Great Yu State, but most of them were not the direct descendants, and everyone was aware of the fact that there were many secret power techniques inherited only by the direct descendants, And this was the reason why these direct descendants must enter the imperial schools to prevent these secret power techniques to go into the hands of the outsiders. So, only the children of branch clans would join other sects. So this title of young marquis was mostly self-proclaimed and nothing else. Moreover, Yuan school was also a big power on equal footing with the imperial clan of Great Yu State, so exploiting the secular powers to constrain a disciple of the Yuan school was even more of a joke. I heard that there is a particularly arrogant man among this year's new disciples claiming to be comparable to the seed disciples, but I did not think that you are even arrogant than the rumors. The young marquis said. Well, why don't you mind your own business? I don't care whether you are the young marquis or whatever. Trying to use your power and prestige in the Yuan school is really a joke. Yi Shiwen sneered and said in a disrespecting tone as if he simply didn't care about the young marquis. You are courting death. The young marquis suddenly became furious and with an extremely cold look in his eyes, he rushed towards Yi Shiwen. Chapter 120, Pseudo-Spiritual Tool. The young marquis' fist arrived directly in front of Yi Shiwen, and with just a look, one could say that it was an overbearing fist technique, and as his punch blasted, the Zhen Qi surged out of his body and flooded the surrounding area. With a burst of Zhen Qi under his feet, Yi Shiwen instantly launched the Celestial Step, and while displaying the might of Celestial Step technique, practiced to the Deshang realm, in a flash, he took several mysterious steps with his clothes floating all over in the wind, and he very smoothly and gracefully avoided the fist of young marquis. Then, immediately, Yi Shiwen shot his palm, which instantly caused an explosion like the thunder and lightning, and the thunder-like Zhen Qi wrapped on the palms of Yi Shiwen instantly blasted vigorously. With a loud shout, he instantly shot rushing Thunder Hand, and it seemed like a group of thunder and lightning had directly impacted. How is this possible? There were expressions of disbelief on the faces of the seven masters. How can his strength increase to such an extent? When the seven masters saw this palm technique, suddenly, cold sweat started dripping down from their foreheads. If by chance, right now, they were fighting Yi Shiwen, then right this very instant, facing his tyrannical palm attack, they would have instantly been exploded to bits. Although they knew that Yi Shiwen had defeated Mo Han in the battle, however earlier, during the assessment examination, Yi Shiwen had broken through right in front of them, and in their opinion he was a strong expert, but it was impossible for them to digest the rumors about him having achieved the Xiantianshao realm. However, just now, they witnessed his strength of Xiantianshao realm, which completely blew their minds and threw their hearts into chaos. And young marquis simply never expected that Yi Shiwen's strength would actually be so formidable. He had always listened to the seven masters, and according to them, Yi Shiwen had a false reputation, but his strength was fiercer than those seven masters. But now, he finally realized how ridiculously wrong they all were to underestimate Yi Shiwen. The tyrannical strength of Yi Shiwen was far beyond the imagination of the young marquis, and he was certain that this kind of strength was impossible for inner disciples to attain, and only seed disciples could display such strength. However, at this time, he couldn't achieve anything by complaining, so he quickly folded his arms around his chest and instantly congealed an iron wall-like moon-shaped protection barrier and prepared himself to receive the palm attack of Yi Shiwen arriving at his chest. For others, it was like an impregnable iron defense. Want to defend? Yi Shiwen sneered and sped up the rushing Thunder Hand by several times, and in an instant, it fiercely and accurately blasted into the chest of the young marquis. Yi Ziwen's rushing Thunder Hand attack instantly pierced right through the young marquis's iron defense and shot into his chest. Bang! Accompanied with a sudden and violent thunderclap sound, the body of young marquis was instantly blasted away, soared high in the sky, and severely fell on the ground. The young marquis' body severely hit the ground, his blood sprayed out, and he looked at Yi Shiwen, with an ominous color flashing in his eyes. Then suddenly, from his body, a cold light flickered, and almost in a flash, a black light suddenly arrived in front of Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen was taken aback for an instant, and he immediately understood that this cold brightness was no trivial matter. He quickly raised his hand to block, and at the same time, he also chopped out a blade light. Bang! The blade light maliciously collided with that cold black light, and Yi Shiwen suddenly felt an enormous force emitting out from that cold light, which almost made him to lose grip on his long blade. That cold bright light fell on the ground, and when Yi Shiwen took a look at it, he saw that it was actually a double-edged flying sword, exuding a touch of spiritual pressure, and to be specific, it was actually a double-edged spiritual tool, but right now, this double-edged flying sword was full of cracks. A moment ago, this double-edged flying sword severely clashed with Yi Ziwen's long blade, and with a loud rumbling sound, several cracks appeared on it. Yi Shiwen looked at his long blade, which was unexpectedly the same as before, glowing with a sharp and penetrating coldness, without a single crack on its surface, and was secretly amazed. In the cave of iron-back silver apes, he had found this long blade from a pile of a lot of decayed and rusted weapons, because back then he had taken a fancy to this long blade, but did not know the origins of this weapon. He never thought that it would actually be so terrible that it would shatter a spiritual tool in one blow. These weapons were generally divided into ordinary weapons, magical weapons, and spiritual tools, while the spiritual tools were divided into low-grade spiritual tools, high-grade spiritual tools, and top-grade spiritual tools. Generally, the Hotian-level warriors used the so-called ordinary weapons. These weapons were made up of iron, and could easily be scrapped, requiring constant tinkering. Considering the ranking of weapons, right above ordinary weapons were the so-called magical weapons, generally used by the warriors at the peak of Hotian 9th stage and above, as well as by the warriors at the Xiantian 5th stage and below. A lot of rare materials were required to create magical weapons like 100-years-old cold iron and so on, and compared with ordinary weapons, magical weapons were a lot stronger and more rugged. Incomparably sharp, could cut even high-standard magical weapons. Yi Shiwen always thought his long blade was only a high-quality magical weapon, because none of the ordinary weapons had ever been able to put even a scratch on it, and with just a single strike, his long blade had scrapped several magical weapons before, but just now, his long blade actually scrapped a spiritual tool. There was no spiritual aura present in the long blade like it generally was present in spiritual tools, implying that his long blade was not a spiritual tool, so Yi Shiwen assumed that it was a magical weapon. However, in the collision just now, it immediately chopped down and scrapped a double-edged flying sword spiritual tool. He could not say much about its sharpness, but he witnessed the extraordinary firmness of the long blade with his own eyes. That double-edged flying sword cracked by its own power of countershaking, showing the extraordinary toughness of Yi Ziwen's long blade. However, a thought suddenly turned up in his mind. This young marquis had definitely not reached the Xiantian 6th stage, and still hadn't transformed Xiantian Zhenqi into Xiantian Zhenyuan. Then how it was possible for him to manipulate the spiritual tool. Spiritual tools could only be operated and manipulated by Xiantian 6th stage masters and above. If someone wanted to manipulate a spiritual tool, then, first of all, it was necessary to have Zhenyuan, and only Xiantian 6th stage warriors and above could transform Xiantian Zhenqi into Zhenyuan, and using this Zhenyuan, they could operate spiritual tools. So in other words, this double-edged flying sword should not be a true spiritual tool, but the so-called pseudo-spiritual tool. A pseudo-spiritual tool was a weapon ranked just above the magical weapons and just below true spiritual tools, and possessed a part of the spiritual characteristics. The power a pseudo-spiritual tool possessed was obviously far less than the true spiritual tools, but the advantage was that it was very easy to manipulate, and even warriors who had not yet reached the Xiantian 6th stage could use them. But even so, the pseudo-spiritual tools were absolutely valuable, and only 100 or 200 disciples from among tens of thousands of disciples probably had pseudo-spiritual tools. Only those top disciples kept pseudo-spiritual tools that were rich enough to buy them. Suddenly, the young marquis spurted out a mouthful of blood. Even if this spiritual tool was just a pseudo-spiritual tool, but there was still a trace of Yuan Shen attached to it. When Yi Shiwen scrapped the double-edged flying sword, he also thoroughly annihilated the spiritual link of Yuan Shen between the weapon and young marquis, and in addition to that, he had just received a palm attack from Yi Shiwen, so it was more like an injury over an injury, so he simply fainted altogether. Young marquis. the 7 masters suddenly called out in alarm. They never thought that young Marquis' pseudo-spiritual tool would not be able to hurt Yi Shiwen, and Yi Zaiwen's long blade would actually chop down and shatter a precious pseudo-spiritual tool in just one strike. Yi Shiwen stepped forward, and while coldly staring at those 7 people, he said in a calm and cold voice, "Say, last time, who directed you to deal with me?" Chapter 121. By Ma Jiao's stronghold. Yi Shiwen stepped forward, and while coldly staring at those 7 people, he said in a calm and cold voice, "Say, last time, who directed you to deal with me?" During the assessment exam itself, Yi Shiwen had naturally speculated who was the mastermind behind all this, but there was no opportunity to confirm his speculation, so this time, he must take advantage of this favorable situation to ask them and confirm his guess. "No one's directing us, what are you talking about?" The Chinese-robed man standing in the middle said obstinately in an argumentative manner. "It's Hu Yanghang, right?" Yi Shiwen indifferently said, and discovered subtle changes in the complexions of these 7 masters, along with somewhat consternation and astonishment, albeit fleeting. But it was enough for Yi Shiwen to confirm his speculation. "Well, you can choose not to answer, although I can't kill you here, but I can still crush all the bones in your bodies." Yi Shiwen sneered and said, because for these 7 people, he did not have a favorable impression, and he was not in a mood to show them mercy. After all, these 7 masters ganged up and tried to intercept him twice, and if it was an average person facing them, then he would have long been crippled by them. There was no fair play in 7 people ganging up on one guy. As soon as the 7 masters heard him, their complexions suddenly paled, because they could sense his resolute killing rage. Counting this time, they had already seen Yi Zaiwen's fierceness twice, and they were aware of the fact that if they were not on the Tongtian Peak, but somewhere outside the Yuan school, then they absolutely couldn't escape from the clutches of a killing god like Yi Shiwen. They never thought that they would be forced to repeatedly intercept him when they were already aware of his ruthlessness. They knew that Yi Shiwen was definitely not a merciful guy, and on top of that, they had dared to intercept him twice, and because of this, they felt that Yi Shiwen might actually do what he just said. Yes, it was Brother Hu. At this time, a disciple could not bear the intense pressure and killing intent released by Yi Shiwen and finally confessed out loud. Immediately, the complexions of other disciples darkened, because they revealed the name of Hu Yanghang, an influential core disciple, and from now onwards, things were going to be tough for them in the Yuan school. Although Hu Yanghang might not care whether Yi Shiwen knew that he was the real mastermind planning things behind the scenes, but he was an eccentric man, and it was hard to predict his mood. By the time they would start following Hu Yanghang, forget the benefits they would get by being at his side, perhaps he might torment them to death. Although they still hadn't followed Hu Yanghang for too long, but they were well aware of his cold disposition. However, at this time, Yi Shiwen had no desire to haggle over with them, so he just picked up the pseudo-spiritual tool from ground and turned around to leave. Although the body of this pseudo-spiritual tool was densely covered in cracks, but without a doubt, even if it couldn't be fixed, it was still a pseudo-spiritual tool and could fetch him a price of at least 10,000 spirit stones. There were unsightly complexions on the faces of these 7 masters as Yi Zaiwen's figure was moving farther away from them, but none of them actually dared to pursue him. After all, even young Marquis lost to him, so what could they possibly do? After walking for a while, under the foot of a mountain, Yi Shiwen whistled and a huge red-crowned crane immediately flew down from the sky. It was a well-trained crane, and after years of training, it would fully understand the instructions of Yi Shiwen through their interlinked minds. After he got on the crane, it flapped its wings and immediately flew out, drawing traces of lines in the sky. The wind was cold, fierce howling could be heard, and although sun was high in the sky, but chilled wind was intermittently blowing. It was an extremely strange atmosphere and could make anyone to break into cold sweat. There was a desolate scene everywhere. The sandstorm was blowing, confusing the human eyes, and crows were cawing above the withered vines entangled on the trees. Yi Shiwen was walking on the trail as mentioned in the mission, and there was supposed to be a village not far away from there, but he couldn't see any vitality in the surrounding areas, just dead air was present everywhere. According to information present in the mission he received from Iyuan School, the Baimajiao stronghold was located not far away from that village, somewhere in this area where Yi Shiwen was currently taking a stroll. Although, the followers of Baimajiao were actually human beings, but their acting style and conduct had slowly drifted closer towards the devil race. These followers practiced the power techniques based on Modeo, introduced in this world by the devil race long ago, and their ultimate goal was to break through the void and ascend to the devil world. The followers of Baimajiao were still humans in flesh and bones but couldn't be regarded as humans anymore, rather should be regarded as devils. The area of their establishment, in basically a 500 kilometers radius, was generally desolate and uninhabited by humans, and finding them was also very simple because they would travel large distances in search of humans and very few followers of Baimajiao hid their trails. Also, the followers of Baimajiao practiced cultivation methods that required human essence as practice materials, which in turn helped in increasing their cultivation by leaps and bounds, and after refining the human essence from the body, they would generally leave the remains which acted as a trail to find them. Yi Shiwen continued to walk inside, and in his heart he was secretly wary and vigilant because he could see the mummified remains of people lying on the roadside, and the black and red dried blood was present everywhere on the ground. Some scavenger birds could also be seen gnawing these corpses. Yi Shiwen could not help but held his breath. These followers of Baimajiao were simply too cruel and disgusting. He himself had also killed people before, but it was all because he had been provoked and had no other choice but to kill or get killed. He never killed innocent people, and these corpses belonged to innocent villagers who didn't even have the strength to fight back, which was simply cruel. He was very annoyed to see how mutilated these corpses looked. Just from looking at the miserable state of these corpses, Yi Shiwen couldn't help but gasp at such a horrifying scene. When the carrion birds saw Yi Shiwen, a living human being, there was a sudden pitter-patter and they flew all over. These carrion birds had already absorbed a lot of yin qi from the corpses, and soon, the demon core inside their bodies would have a transformation into Devil Dan. However, even after transforming into a devil beast, they would still not be a match of Yi Shiwen. He started to mercilessly wave the long blade in his hand, and after seeing the miserable state of the corpses and carrion birds scavenging over them, in his mind, he was getting sick of this scenery. The Daoguang released from his blade towards the carrion birds. They screamed pitifully but couldn't escape, and all of them were split in half. Yi Shiwen observed the corpses and noticed as if someone used a claw power technique to grasp the bodies directly from the head and then sucked out the soul, vitality, blood and qi from the living human bodies, which was extremely cruel and inhuman to do to someone. Yi Shiwen rushed through the area while beheading the scavengers like jackals, carrion birds. Even the devil beasts that he encountered on the way weren't able to escape from the fury of his long blade. Jie Jie, a human has come to die. Suddenly, Yi Shiwen heard a sharp and hoarse voice along with shriek laughter that came from behind him, and at that instant, a huge bloody claw also approached towards him from behind. Seeing that the huge bloody claw was coming to grasp him, Yi Shiwen immediately took a step and jumped into the sky, and the very next instant, he disappeared and directly appeared about 10 meters away, while at that place where he was standing just now, instantly, a skinny and bloody claw severely struck and created a big hole. Yi Shiwen looked and saw that the attacker had actually a strange appearance like a shadow, with his body completely covered up in black cloak, but from the cloak, 2 huge bloody devil claws were stretched out, and looked cold and gloomy, densely covered with blood capillaries, and looked extremely terrifying. "Boy, I didn't think that you would dodge my attack." That strange shadow laughed and said, "It seems that people of this village were slaughtered by you." Yi Shiwen looked coldly at that strange shadow and said, "Precisely, I turned those stupid mortals into practice materials by extracting their vitality. Of course, it's a lifetime blessing for them." That strange shadow replied in a loud voice. Chapter 122 Core Disciple. Precisely, I turned those stupid mortals into practice materials by extracting their vitality. Of course, it's a lifetime blessing for them. That strange shadow replied in a loud voice, "Jie Jie, I did not expect to find a practitioner of Wudao here, haha, and it seems that you possess a very strong vitality, and even the nourishment I got by extracting the vitalities of 1,000 mortals is nothing comparable to the nourishment I will receive by extracting your vitality. That strange shadow said while at this time, many sounds of strange laughter came from all around. Ha ha, after absorbing his blood and essence, this old man can go one step further. Hurry up and kill him, I want to eat his heart and liver. Yi Shiwen saw several shadows clad in black cloaks coming out from all directions, and each of them was releasing strong killing intent. It was evident that they were waiting in the shadows to surround and ambush him. A deep sense of disgust flashed in the eyes of Yi Shiwen. He didn't feel so much disgust even for those true killers who enjoyed killing, but for these old devils, he instantly developed disgust because these old devils didn't treat people as humans, but as livestock, on whom they fed on whenever they wanted to. They were a bunch of twisted and depraved monsters that had already lost their morality long ago. Sneaky freaks. Yi Shiwen sneered again and suddenly jumped forward, and right then, the earth cracked from the tremendous blasting strength in his foot and shot his whole stature instantly flying out like a shell, while at the same time, he chopped out a huge bladiki. Bang! An old devil was instantly chopped in half. Bastard, you dared to kill one of us. Kill him, hurry up and kill him. The devils of Bai Majiao started to roar again, and their devilish aura completely released and spread in the surrounding area, and a foul and disgusting smell also spread everywhere. Yi Shiwen sensed that all of these devils were actually the existences at the peak of Xiantian 5th stage. In addition to that, they had practiced a unique Modeo-based power technique, which made them so powerful that even the true masters of Xiantian Shao realm would find it very difficult to deal with them, and might die if encountered so many of devils at once. Yi Shiwen took a deep breath, then a bright and dazzling Daoguang instantly enveloped him inside a sphere of white light. The area of effect for this attack was quite wide and instantly blew away the cloaks of those devils who couldn't escape the range of this attack, revealing the true physical features of these followers of Bai Majiao. Charred faces such as carbon, many places on their bodies were covered with numerous long and dense scales, and their appearances really did resemble that of a devil. It was obvious that their practice must have gone wrong at some point of time, and as a result, they ended up having such bizarre appearances, covered in scales. The Modeo-based power techniques had been handed down by the devil race itself in the past, and once practiced, it caused the genes in the human body to transform, and slowly, humans transformed into devils. This process was very painful and cruel, but those who practiced correctly could maintain their human appearances and were called devil men. But just from looking at these old devils, it was obvious that they were failed products produced from the wrong way of practicing Modeo-based power techniques, and as a result of this failure, it was impossible for them to break through the barrier of Xiantian 5th stage for their whole lives. Modeo-based power techniques were cruel, however, the might granted by them was tremendous. Advancement was also very rapid, of course. There was a very serious side effect of transforming into half-devil freak, but so long as one was careful while practicing, one could avoid such a fate. The other side effect that these half-devil freaks had to live with was that they needed to kill humans and absorb their essence in order to maintain their own existence, because if they didn't kill, the mochi inside their bodies would explode and kill them. Only those who obtained the heritage of elite and pure Modeo-based power techniques had a chance of successfully practicing the correct way. These cruel, bloodthirsty old devils wanted to kill Yi Shiwen and extract the vitality and blood out of his body. Their blood-red eyes were filled with greed while looking at Yi Shiwen from top to bottom. Boom! The claw of an old devil advanced towards Yi Shiwen and grasped, causing a loud air explosion, while the bloody qi instantly accumulated and advanced towards Yi Shiwen to grab him. Dang! Yi Shiwen maliciously chopped out his long blade, which directly clashed with the bloody claw of that old devil, but this clash issued a metal clashing sound in the surroundings. This old devil had refined his hands and had already transformed them into spiritual weapons, which clearly displayed the distortion in their psyches. They clearly disregarded their own flesh and blood. Yi Shiwen retreated few steps, and the long blade began to dance in his hand, producing a curtain of blade shadows everywhere, which then isolated those old devils away from him. If there was only one old devil, then Yi Shiwen wouldn't care, but there were so many of these old devils, and Yi Shiwen was having a hard time dealing with all of them at once. Although these old devils were only at the peak of Xiantian 5th stage, but relying on the might of Modeo-based power techniques, they could easily compete with a master who had already entered into the realm of Xiantian Shao, which was the main reason why they were daring to be so incomparably rampant in front of Yi Shiwen. Hidden dragon rises from the abyss. An old devil crashed into the curtain of blade shadows and was chopped down in 2 halves, but another one actually seized this opportunity to sneak an attack on Yi Shiwen, but he didn't waste even an instant and acted decisively by instantly using the first move of Coiling Dragon Palm against that old devil. Yi Shiwen suddenly felt a steady stream of Zhen Qi being taken away from his body, which was far more in amount than other moves, but at that very instant his hand instantly turned into a dragon claw. A cyan dragon claw shone brightly in this gloomy environment. Suffused with a brilliant light, it directly descended towards that old devil and caught him in its grasp. Without getting any chance to react, that old devil was caught in the dragon claw made up of condensed Zhen Qi. Yi Shiwen used his thought to manipulate the dragon claw and tightly clenched, and with a bang, the old devil turned into minced meat. Yi Shiwen had already practiced the move Hidden Dragon Rises from the Abyss to the Deshang realm, and it had not just led to a sudden increase in its power. Now he could transform a dragon whenever he wanted to, and he could also control the movements and shape of the dragon at will. Yi Shiwen beheaded 2 old devils, which reduced a lot of pressure on him, but at the same time, he ended up using a total of 10% of his Xiantian Zhen Qi in the last move. In addition to that, he had also used his blade attacks to behead the scavengers earlier, so now he could at most display this move for up to 8 times before completely exhausting the Zhen Qi inside his body, but there were more than 8 old devils present there. Yi Shiwen didn't want to face such a situation and wanted to get out of the trap of these old devils, so without any hesitation, he decided to call his red-crowned crane and whistled. Immediately, in the sky, a long howling cry came from far away along with wing flapping sound. But immediately after that, yet another loud cry of a bird spread everywhere, and a huge shadow descended down from the sky. It was a giant eagle demon bird and was larger than Yi Ziwen's red-crowned crane, had 2 huge eagle claws that looked cold and extremely aggressive. One must know that ordinary Xiantian warriors couldn't block these unstoppable claws. Above this demon bird stood a young man with an appearance of a 20-year-old guy, had an outstanding demeanor, clad in warrior-like brilliant clothing, carrying a double-edged sword, and his stern imposing aura was simply skyrocketing. "You evildoer, you really act recklessly. You actually dared to take a mission that you cannot handle alone." The young man shouted loudly, and the surrounding air actually began to surge up right after his loud shout spread. "One more human, this means more blood and food, ha ha ha, and this one also seems to be a disciple with profound cultivation." An old devil laughed and said. However, before his voice could fall, he was suddenly pierced by a terrifying sword key and died on the spot. "Acts recklessly," the young man coldly said. Yi Shiwen saw the symbol on the sleeves of the young man, and immediately relaxed, because he was a disciple of Yi Yuan's school. "Everyone run. This is a master of Xiantian 6th stage or maybe above." These old devils were not stupid and immediately scattered in all directions to escape. The young man waved his sword and instantly released sword key, which suddenly flew in all directions, and without getting enough time to escape, all 11 fleeing old devils were pierced by the sword key and died instantly. Just a moment ago, these old devils were trying to be quite arrogant in front of Yi Shiwen, but the scene reversed instantly, and they were all killed in a flash. Chapter 123, Prince Mo Yen. These old devils, who were trying to be rampant a moment ago, were not a match for this young man, and it was obvious that this young man's cultivation had already surpassed the peak of Xiantian 5th stage, and having a higher level of cultivation implied that he was definitely a core disciple. Using just the speech to cause the shock waves in the air just like mighty waves in the ocean was a method that could only be used by the masters of Xiantian 6th stage and above. Yi Shiwen could also create mighty shock waves in the air using the blasts from his fists, but even he couldn't achieve such a feat to do that just by using his voice. To send shock waves in the air from just the speech required a terrifying aura possessed by masters of Xiantian 6th stage and above only. This was actually a result of manifestation of an expert's internal strength already reaching a terrifying level. Myself, Yi Shiwen, I thank Senior for saving me. Yi Shiwen approached the young man and said while cupping one hand into other across his chest, although he could have saved himself without the help, but he was still obliged to this young man for saving him and showed his gratitude. You are Yi Shiwen? The young man looked at Yi Shiwen and it seemed that he already knew about Yi Shiwen and said with a smile, well-deserved reputation, it's a miracle that you were able to navigate through this desolate area all the way to the stronghold of followers of Bai Majiao. Frankly speaking, you have accomplished a task that even the masters of Xiantian Shao realm cannot do alone. Senior brother is flattering. Yi Shiwen was not surprised to see that the young man already knew about him, because in a short time, he had gained a sudden fame in the Yiyuan school, especially after defeating Mo Han. Although he was just an inner disciple, but he still had gained reputation among the core disciples. Core disciples would always pay attention to the exceptionally strong and talented people like Yi Shiwen, because these people were generally seed disciples or those comparable to seed disciples, and almost all of them were at the peak of Xiantian 5th stage or in the Xiantian Shao realm, and no one knew when they would cross this threshold and would come on equal footing with the core disciples. So core disciples didn't treat these people as some ordinary inner disciples. It just so happens that we are in a need of more people to increase our strength. Brother Yi, this is a busy time, but would you like to lend your strength to us? The young man began to explain things to Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen came to know from this young man's mouth that his name was Zhuge Xingli and he was a core disciple of Yiyuan school and also received a mission from main sect to go and exterminate the followers of Bai Majiao. Few core disciples gathered together to ambush a powerful character among the followers of Bai Majiao called Prince Mo Yen. Prince Mo Yen was an illustrious and well-known character among the followers of Bai Majiao, and the rumors were that he was actually a prince of a small country, but later he was introduced into Bai Majiao, leading to the demise of a small but prosperous country, but he still didn't care and continued to follow the principles of Bai Majiao, and later, he became a core disciple of Bai Majiao. Now, he was regarded as a very important personality in Bai Majiao. And this time, during the sudden upheaval of Bai Majiao, Prince Mo Yen was playing quite an important role and it was necessary to deal with him as soon as possible. So, Zhuge Xingli and others assembled to jointly ambush Prince Mo Yen, and Zhuge Xingli wanted Yi Shiwen to also participate along with them and lend them his strength because he didn't know when they might need an extra hand, because dealing with Prince Mo Yen could be tricky and he wanted to increase the chances of success for this mission. Zhuge Xingli got this idea in a spur of the moment, because Yi Shiwen had already gained the recognition of him and other core disciples, and they wouldn't mind letting him into their team. Also, Prince Mo Yen was supposed to pass from here and Zhuge Xingli was responsible for the lookout and also to warn any nearby disciples, but he couldn't use signal to warn them because it would alert the enemy. So he was surveilling this area on his eagle when he found Yi Shiwen dealing with several old devils and decided to help. Prince Mo Yen was a big fat fish and there was a big reward of 50,000 spirit stones on his head. Having a rank of core disciple in Bai Majiao was definitely rare, and in addition to that, he was the mastermind behind the rebellion of Bai Majiao in these regions. If they were able to successfully ambush and catch him, then this would surely be a big catch and beneficial for everyone involved in the mission. Yi Shiwen decided to accept the offer of Zhuge Xingli, because he also very much loathed the methods and practices of followers of Bai Majiao. These people were disgusting and despicable and he would gladly participate in their extermination. After determining this next course of action, Yi Shiwen began reciting, sending people to afterlife, for the salvation of these souls who were brutally killed by the followers of Bai Majiao in the worst ways possible. Although he was aware that these people might have their souls completely sucked out and swallowed, but there still remained their grievances and resentment in the air, and if not prayed now, over time, this place would gradually turn a gloomy accumulation of yin qi which would corrupt the atmosphere, and attracted to the accumulated yin qi, ghosts from all over would flock into this area and turn this place unlivable for people. A long time ago, during the formation of Great U State, there were several times when large mutinies occurred and several thousand soldiers fought on the battlefields and died horrifying deaths. At that time of turmoil of wars, no one had time to pray for the souls of dead soldiers who were constantly driven to unjustified deaths. Wars continued to flourish in the process of building of the Great U State, and several battlefields were gradually infested with ghost soldiers who couldn't leave the mortal world and were bound to these battlefields. Sunlight didn't reach these battlefields, only a chill was spread throughout, and if ordinary people tired to go close, then froth would start to come out of their mouths, Inchi would invade their bodies, leading to their deaths. Even warriors, exuberating with vitality, were afraid to go deep into these areas infested with ghosts. Although situation here wouldn't turn that bad compared to those battlefields, but since Yi Shiwen was already here, he was unable to leave this alone, and had a moral obligation to do whatever he could for the dead. After finishing the recitation of "Send People to Afterlife," the resentment and grievances filling the air finally disappeared. Inchi was still present and hadn't completely vanished, but this amount was less than critical, and the most troublesome thing was the lingering resentment that completely vanished after Yi Zaiwen's prayer. As far as Inchi was concerned, under the exposure of the sun, it would soon disappear. Yi Shiwen, along with Zhuge Xingli, rode the eagle and soon arrived at the gathering place of many core disciples. Behind a hill, there was a gathering of roughly 20 disciples of Yi Yuan school. This group was being led by 3 core disciples. Zhuge Xingli gave their introduction one by one to Yi Shiwen. The first one looked more like a short and stout merchant with a sort of smile on his fat face and was quite famous among core disciples, called Xiao Jin, and it was said that he came from a merchant aristocratic clan, and although he was considered very strong, but his merchant skills were even stronger, which ultimately made him quite famous among the core disciples. Next to Xiao Jin stood a beautiful woman clad in black clothes, appeared to be 20 years old, and was also a famous core disciple, called Shui Yuan. Next to Shui Yuan stood a young man clad in blue clothes, and there was a sword in his hand, and was a core disciple called Zheng Yizhou. However, he wasn't famous like others and was just nobody among the core disciples. And this time, these 4 core disciples together took the mission to ambush Prince Mo Yen, and this group was being led by them. As for the rest of the 20 disciples, they were inner disciples recruited by these 4 core disciples to assist in this mission, but none of them were ordinary disciples. Each of them possessed deep breath, dignified appearance, and weakest among them was at the peak Xiantian 5th stage. Also there were some who had already reached the Xiantian Shao realm and were considered leading figures among the inner disciples, but in this mission, they could only play the supporting role. However, there wasn't the slightest dissatisfaction present on their faces, because they clearly knew what kind of character Prince Mo Yen actually was. In the future, he would most likely become one of the giant figures of Bai Ma Jiao and also among the Modeo practitioners. When they came to know that Yi Shiwen was the newest addition to this group, they were quite surprised. After all, he hadn't accumulated small fame during these past days, but not many recognized him from his appearance. That you're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.